This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. Why am I currently thinking of peanut farms and the secret tape of LBC presenters? If anyone can get the correct answer to both of those questions, I shall give you the money myself, in the immortal words of Les Dennis. Why am I currently thinking of peanut farms and the secret tape of LBC presenters saying things that they wish they could forget? You might get one of them, but there's no earthly way anybody's going to get both of them. The second question has a relatively easy answer. Whenever I say, is there a German word for? Is there a German word for that feeling that you kind of want to look away from something but you can't, or that you don't really want to talk about something but you also really do, or that you've asked this question so many times that you must have probably got to the correct answer but you can't resist the urge to ask it again in case there's a different answer? And you keep sending me suggestions of what that word may be, and I look at them very, very closely, thinking to myself, they're trying to get me to say something rude on the radio without noticing. So you send me these German words that may have a little thing hidden in the middle of them. These German-looking words. They're not even German words, I don't think, in most cases. So I can't read any of them out. I haven't got the confidence. No, I can't do it. Maybe that one's all right. The German word for realization, but that's not what I'm looking for, Davey. I'm looking for one of those compound words, like Schadenfreude, that we haven't got an actual single word equivalent for. Some of these words, they're so long they look like a small town in Wales. The German words that combine countless different constituent parts to convey something very simple and very, very specific. But I haven't quite nailed it yet. Yeah, all right, so well done on the peanut farms. It is Jimmy Carter. I think that is a figure who springs into many minds whenever peanut farms are mentioned. But why specific? Oh, that's nice from David. Trumpenfreude. We're all suffering from Trump. Well, no, is it? I don't know. Peanut farm, because he was a peanut farmer. But why am I thinking of Jimmy Carter's peanut farm specifically today? Why do you think that is? Specifically today. The actions of the latest US president, perhaps, prompting me to think of what Jimmy Carter did when he became president of the United States. So Jimmy Carter put his peanut farm into a blind trust. This is something that used to be absolutely commonplace, but is no longer. He put it into a blind trust so that nothing he did as president could have involved any personal gain, as it were, as a consequence of him owning a peanut farm. He didn't sell it, as some people have claimed, but he put it into a blind trust, which allows you to retain ownership of an asset while transferring management to another person or entity. How the world turns, eh? I mean, not only are there claims that Donald Trump has himself trousered $2.4 billion, his own businesses, during his first presidential term. Remember, he even uses his own hotels to put up Secret Service personnel. And there are reports reaching us now that he's charging $5 million a pop just to have dinner with him. And he's not allowed to run again, so it can't be for campaign funds. They'll claim it's for the library, the presidential library. Every president gets to build a library. Did you know that? I've actually been to FDR's. It's a magical place. But Donald Trump doesn't give the impression of ever having read a book. He hasn't even read the book that he supposedly wrote, according to the ghostwriter of The Art of the Deal. So the idea that he's raising millions and millions and millions of dollars to build a library seems a little fanciful. But just consider for a moment Jimmy Carter putting his family peanut farm into a blind trust so that there could be no perception, let alone possibility, of corruption or self-interest. And then listen to something that happened on the White House lawn yesterday. And again, there should be a German word for this, shouldn't there? The photograph I saw online on Blue Sky, if you're interested in my platform of choice, the photograph I saw, I just presumed was a joke. Did you? Do you know the one that I'm talking about? Even now, even after all these years, all these scandals, all these shocks, all these confirmations that we are not just down the rabbit hole, but absolutely broken. That the United States of America is close to collapse in the context of norms, in the context of core values, close to collapse. But I still thought that can't be real. That photograph can't be real. And it was a photograph of Donald Trump clutching in his hand a piece of paper that looked like the sort of thing a Tesla salesman would have in his hand were you to turn up on the forecourt of a Tesla dealership at some point later today. So he'd have in front of him, the red one is 40,000, the grey one is 50,000, and it wasn't. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a fraud. It wasn't a Photoshop is the phrase that I'm looking for. It was real. It was absolutely real. And there he was on the White House lawn, essentially working as a Tesla salesman, because a fairly widespread attempt to boycott Tesla, to punish Elon Musk for various reasons, has obviously proved successful. Nothing says that something has proved successful more than the person who's been targeted by a campaign panicking on such a grand scale that he gets his friend the president to start selling cars. I mean, you almost wish they were second-hand, don't you? Because that's the phrase that you'd normally use at this point. Would you buy a second-hand car off this man? Of course, millions and millions and millions of Americans would. Well, actually, they'd buy a cardboard box off this man with wheels drawn on the side of it that he claimed was the fastest car in history. So fast, fastest. Some people say it's the fastest car that has ever been seen, but it's not. It's a cardboard box with some wheels stuck on the side of it. But you know that millions of Americans would buy it. Yesterday, he tried to sell Teslas. And think of the peanut farm while you listen to this.
Should I get in?
Get in!
Okay.
Have you ever sat behind the steering wheel of one of these?
This is a different panel than I've had. Everything's computer. That's beautiful. Wow. I mean, look, in terms of imagination, I think I have a great imagination. Who else but this guy would design this, and everybody on the road is looking at it? It's amazing, actually. As soon as I saw it, I said, that is the coolest design. It's. Do you agree with that, Brian? I mean,
I do.
It's amazing.
It's very cool. Yeah.
You got to give him credit.
We want the future to look like the future, and it's kind of what kind of truck would Blade Runner drive?
So, President Trump, are you looking to buy or lease today?
Well, I'm going to buy, and I'm going to buy because number one, it's a great product, as good as it gets, and number two, because this man has devoted his energy and his life to doing this. And I think he's been treated very unfairly by a very small group of people. And I just want people to know that you can't be penalized for being a patriot.
If it's a very small group of people that are punishing him unfairly, why on earth do they need to go to the trouble of a staged photo opportunity on the White House lawn to try to sell cars? And the note in his hand that I presumed was not real, photographed by a Reuters photographer, literally has on it Tesla pricing, full self-driving, Model X, $112-something thousand, and then all the different types, all the different models. And it's one of those mornings, I think, where we can allow ourselves to wonder what on earth is going on. It's a very, very good pun, swastika, isn't it? Particularly after Elon Musk did the Nazi salutes at that conference. Swastika, where, of course, Liz Truss and Nigel Farage were happy to follow him onto the stage later at the same conference. But the leader of the French far right felt that it would be a little bit inappropriate for him to do so. The heirs of the Vichy regime balking at Nazi salutes, but Nigel and Liz absolutely untroubled by it. It's one of those days where we wonder what is going on. And the reason I mentioned COVID earlier was because at the beginning of COVID, I don't know if you were kind enough to listen. Statistics suggest that you were. But I often found myself wondering, I think this is why the curse of O'Brien kicked in so hard, particularly with regard to Matt Hancock. I never really got it with Boris Johnson, but I may have got a bit of it with Dominic Cummings. The curse of O'Brien is the liberal burden. The burden of decency, when you just want to believe the best of people, even people who are constantly telling you how awful they are. And during those dreadful weeks, much of which I spent broadcasting to you from a shed at the bottom of my garden, during those dreadful weeks, I found it close to impossible to believe that things were quite as chaotic as they appeared to be. You remember when Boris Johnson appeared to say, on breakfast television that we should just let it run through the population, even as we were watching the footage coming in from other countries of bodies being, well, forgive me, but piled high. Some of the stories that we heard over the weekend as the anniversary of the outbreak was commemorated were chilling, fresh in the memory and yet somehow also forgotten. So I often sat here and you often agreed with me. We couldn't quite work out what it was, could we? The plan. But we found it really hard to believe that there wasn't a plan at all. That this was just, as Dominic Cummings later described it, a supermarket trolley with a wonky wheel. Do you remember that idea that it is just absolutely impossible to control? There is neither rhyme nor reason to what Boris Johnson and his administration were doing at the time, and similarly to what Donald Trump is doing now. Here's a senior economics reporter on CNBC called Steve Leisman.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs. And now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it. And the trouble, Kelly, is that it shows there are no bounds around President Trump. This is very different from the first administration, where there were people around him who seemed to, I don't know what the word is, but smooth over some of the edges now. And the other thing that's not talked about, Kelly, is what's going on within the administration in terms of how they're treating the Constitution and laws. I think all of that is bad for the attraction of capital. And the gentleman from Bridgewater is 100% right. We need massive amounts of capital if we want to fund our deficits, pay for the things we want to pay for, sell our bonds, and have high stock prices. And it seems as if this administration is doing everything it can to chase foreign capital away.
Well, and we could go into the strategy of the insanity as a strategy in terms of our trading
Insanity is not a strategy.
Insanity is not a strategy. What was it that the former deputy head of the IMF said to us yesterday? Was it chaos or disruption isn't a glitch, it's a feature? But it's not, is it? Or is it? Insanity is not a strategy. The reason why he would fear for his job is because media owners are bending the knee for Donald Trump. Almost all of them. Not just media owners, but tech platform owners as well, who, for my money, should be treated in more or less the same category, but who cling to some sort of notion of independence or distance from what gets published on their platforms. At least for now they do. The idea that he is just behaving like a shower head. Have you ever dropped the shower in the bath? You must have done. You know, no? You've probably got a posher shower than me. But, you know, if you've got decent water pressure, maybe in a hotel, you've got decent water pressure in a shower, and you've got a handheld shower head, and you drop it, and you want to try and pick it. Well, okay, imagine trying to pick it up without getting wet, if it's on. So you turn the shower on, it comes out the handheld bit, not the rose at the top. It falls out of the bracket and it's bouncing around on the bath surface. It's bouncing around on the bottom of the bath. Your job is to pick it up without getting wet. You can't, right? You've got no idea which way it's going to start spraying next. It's a completely random spray of water. That seems to me to be what he's doing. And yet, there are two questions. The first is obvious. Is it just completely chaotic and random? Because even since that journalist gave that speech yesterday, the 50% tariff has been reduced back down to 25%. One Canadian governor threatened to smack even higher tariffs on energy going into the United States of America, going into one particular state, and Trump appears to have backed down. But how do you keep track of this? How does anybody even begin to keep track of this, quotes, madness? Or to quote that senior economics correspondent at CNBC, to quote him, this insanity. Insanity is not a policy platform, and yet with Donald Trump it seems that it is. So that's the obvious question. Is this just completely random? But who can answer that? Who even knows? We're back to the early days of COVID. We're back to just presuming that there must be some method to this madness. And that's question number one. Is there any method to this madness? 0345 6060 973. And then you can work out for yourself what the second question is. What is it? The EU is now retaliating after they imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium, as I call it, aluminum, as our American friends prefer to describe it. It's bringing in countermeasures on 26 billion euros worth of US goods. We deeply regret this measure, says the European Commission president. But she describes the response as strong but appropriate. They came into effect overnight. It means that US businesses wanting to bring steel and aluminum into the country will have to pay a 25% tax on them. Today, they'll have to pay it. So if he's hoping to improve aluminium production or steel production across the United States in the long term, then he's telling these people they're just going to have to suck up incredibly inflated prices in the foreseeable term, in the short term. The UK currently is sitting on its hands, trying to have its cake and eat it. And again, we're back to the consequences of Brexit. We can't really do much on our own, so we have to sort of cross our fingers and hope, doing the only thing they can do and knowing at the same time that it's almost certainly doomed to fail. So we're not doing anything. We're making or saying warm words about possible deals a little bit further down the line, trade deals a little bit further down the line that may or may not materialize. You know that the 25% tariffs on other imports from Mexico and Canada were announced, and then almost immediately an exemption was announced for car makers and some other goods. There's a 20% levy on other Chinese goods. Some people must think this makes sense. Some people must think this might work. But there are two ways into this from our point of view. That's way number one. Is there method to this madness? 03456060973. But if there isn't, this is where we get psychological. Why is he doing this? Why do you think he's doing this? Who's qualified to answer this question? An economics professor or a psychiatrist? Why is he doing this? Why is he behaving in a way that appears to be entirely unhinged? That has normally very measured and serious commentators using words like insane to describe economic policies. I have a particularly deep understanding of Brexit and used words a little bit like that to describe people who seem to believe that it would be good for this country, good for our economy, that it would increase economic growth. But I mean, some of the things Trump is doing at the moment make Brexit look like a brilliant idea. Make Liz Truss look like an economic... No, let's not get carried away. So can you describe what the method in the madness is? And if you can't, why is he doing what he's doing? What do you think the mad plan might be? The analysis that incorporates insanity? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I can't wait to talk to you today, actually. Don't hold back. If you think you've got something interesting to say, I want to hear it. Because it's one of those mornings where the canvas feels completely blank, right? Completely blank, except for those little water stains from the shower head bouncing around on the bottom of the bath.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Some of your responses I am qualified to crunch. I have the knowledge to properly analyse. Some of them I just don't. So some of them I won't understand. But I think we're in such a mad space. I talk about a blank canvas, a vacuum of understanding. Then almost anything can move into it. So I don't know that I'm going to close Idiot's Corner this morning because there's bound to be one or two. But I don't think I'm going to have the tinfoil hat criticism ready. Kieran, for example, says they've got to be shorting the market. It's the only thing that would make sense financially. I don't really have the knowledge to analyse that, to deny or confirm or agree or disagree with that. But in the absence of anything else, you reach for whatever you can, don't you? The words of a Princeton history professor, editor of a book of essays about Trump's first term, seem pretty appropriate. Carl has reminded us of them. The professor is called Julian E. Zelizer. He says so much you can't really pin him down. The point is to have a contradiction. The point is to have cover. The reality of our modern information world is that you can pick and choose what you want to believe. He instinctively knows that. I would add, because that's what he's always done. He's always just chosen whatever he wants to believe. His aim is never accuracy. It's domination. But this, I think, describes his speaking style rather than his governing style, unless we're going to conclude that the two are the same. Once you undermine consistency, the shared sense of reality, you're undermining the basis of democracy, adds a Yale professor called Jason Stanley, an expert in propaganda and the erasure of history. If there's no shared sense of reality, we can't collectively make decisions, so the only decision maker will be the disruptor in chief. I can live with that. That I can get my head around. But what is all this disruption designed to achieve? That I don't know. And a question that I don't think we'll get onto is one that Sandy and not Sandy, but many others have asked, which is the thing that really mystifies me is why so many people are still so supportive of it. That's not mystifying. You know, there are people who end their own lives because a cult leader has told them to. Or because a cult leader has told them that the world is going to end on Tuesday. So they all take a poison on Monday night. And then they wake up on Tuesday morning and he says, oh, my bad. It's actually 10 years from now. Now give me all the money. And they do. So that's a human thing that is not, I mean, it might be mystifying, but it's not impenetrable or unprecedented. Andy's in Chipping Campden. What's he up to, Andy?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
I think looking back over the last 15 to 20 years, with the involvement of the emergence of the far right, Farage, Musk and whatever, I think it's all deliberate and I think it's all backed by Putin on the whole. I think it's to destroy Western democracy. I really do. They're sowing chaos and division, chipping away and chipping away.
And where does he go? I mean, because destroy Western democracy runs the risk of making you sound like Liz Truss. There's only 10 years to save the West, or Kemi Badenoch claiming that, I don't know, she's the one that can protect Western civilization. But they're generally a lot closer to him politically than you are or than I am. So that's clearly not what you mean. Do you, I mean, and again, I don't think I can use the tinfoil hat criticism today. You're suggesting that he wants to break everything, and I mean, Connor suggests, and then he'll impose martial law and install a sort of dictatorship.
I'm not going as far as saying he'll install a dictatorship at all. I just think it's a Nazi-light right-wing thing that Putin's encouraging just to chip away.
But where does it leave him? Chaos. Where does it leave Trump? Even if he has no choice but to do whatever Putin tells him to do, which is debatable and probably ultimately unprovable, where does it leave him?
I think he thinks with all his contacts and with all his riches and all his money that he's untouchable. I really do think he thinks he's untouchable. But there are so many connections and so many links through, the emergence of UKIP and Reform the last 15, 20 years via London, that I think it's probable that all those connections. I mean, we've heard something. So the
disruption is the point, and, I think so. And stop looking at the agent of disruption and look at the possible sponsor. So what would Russia want? The absolute destabilization of the West.
Yes, I do believe so. I think when Putin was in sort of Dortmund in Germany when the Western Wall came down, whatever. I think he realised he couldn't invade the West. I think he doesn't think he can invade. He doesn't have the wherewithal, but he can conduct a cyber warfare and a political warfare.
And the only way people can argue with you is by not knowing what's going on. Actually. So, you could sit there. This is why Trump derangement syndrome was such a temporarily helpful fig leaf for these idiots, because they could accuse you of being bonkers, because what you're saying sounds a bit bonkers. But unless you can actually explain how apparently insane policies, what they are actually designed to do, then you can't really pick a hole in what Andy is saying, except the hole that is the reminder that in the presence of a vacuum, anything can move into the space that's been vacated. So destabilization on an epic scale, I think, is a defensible position. Why? Less so, because it leads you inevitably to the idea that he's doing the bidding of someone else. What is destabilization for him? You've got two choices. He's either destabilizing the West on behalf of our enemies, which leads you to the Kremlin, or he's destabilizing the West with the express intention of rebuilding it in his own image, which leaves you to dictatorship. So the only two answers you've got to the question of what is this madness designed to do involve Kremlin sponsorship or dictatorship, unless you've got another 0345 6060 973, or the third, of course, which is it is the showerhead. It is the squeaky trolley. It is utterly chaotic and utterly random, and the chaos is the point. But I don't understand that. because my inner 10-year-old immediately says, but why, Dad, why? Why is the chaos the point? How is the chaos the point? It's 10:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is there method to the madness? And if there isn't, why is he doing it? Trade policy is described as insane by normally quite sober commentators. Pascal Lamy, the former head of the World Trade Organization, coming pretty close to that analysis himself. And congratulations to the BBC, who had him on this morning and didn't have Andrea Leadsom on to provide balance, which, as you will know, was the moment I felt that my time at the BBC was coming to a very rapid end, when they told me that we'd be interviewing Pascal Lamy about World Trade Organization related issues and then inviting Andrea Leadsom to tell him why he was wrong or to provide the alternative viewpoint. I don't think we've completely moved out of the era of false equivalence, but goodness me, that was nice and no doubt lovely for Pascal as well. But if there is method in the madness, what is it? And if there isn't, why is he doing what he's doing? 10:34 is the time. Mike is in Croydon. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Great to speak to you.
Likewise.
I think there is method in his madness, because if you consider that, what do people who have loads of money who don't what can they buy? What do they want? They want more money. They want more power.
Usually, not all of them, but yeah, quite a lot of them.
Well, could we say that for Trump?
We can say it for the people around him, and we can definitely say it for Trump, yes.
Okay, so let's put that to one side. So in order to get more money and more power, what do? If you create a recession, people who are cash rich, which he clearly is, because they've just had that Trump coin, and so him and Elon.
Just to be clear, his trade secretary has said that a recession may be the price that we have to pay. They're already talking about it. Within 50 days of getting into the White House, promising to improve the economy, they are now already talking openly about the possibility of recession. So again, you're right in what you say. And mad though it sounds, that 50-day pivot from everything's going to get better to everything is going to get worse is already underway.
Okay, so think about it. People who are cash rich, which he clearly is because of his Trump coin and other things which is put forward.
Yes.
People who are cash rich love recession. The reason they love recession is because they can then go around and buy loads of businesses, loads of industry at rock bottom prices. And then from there, the only way is up.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not tinfoil hat territory, is it? Recessions are most easily weathered the more you've got going into it, and things that come. I don't know, what sort of things do you think these people are wanting to buy? They already own almost everything.
They do, but it still does. It still has a knock to major businesses, and if major businesses are losing money hand over fist, then you can come in because you've got chunks of money sitting in the coffers and say, well, I'll buy it off you for $5 billion, even though it was in the height of before he came into power, it was worth double that, treble that, in fact. So it allows you, once you have cash, to buy more business at lower prices. So
he is not in the service of the Kremlin, then? He is in the service of the kind of autocrats, oligarchs, plutocrats that were not autocrats, plutocrats and oligarchs who were sitting behind him at the inauguration.
Absolutely.
And the ones whose names we don't know, or the ones whose names are not as widely circulated, like Peter Thiel and some of the other people who have been heavily involved in getting J.D. Vance into the vice president's chair.
Absolutely. It's like the Avengers assembling, I'll tell you.
Yeah, except they're baddies.
The nemesis of the Avengers, yeah.
You may have lost me a little bit with you. Is that Marvel Universe or is that the other lot?
That's Marvel.
Yeah, there we go.
Universe.
Well played, Mark. Big fan. If we can bring it all down to Marvel characters, then we are laughing. 10:37 is the time. Stephen is in Glasgow. Stephen, what would you like to say?
The tariffs on Mexico were put on to initially secure the border, which they've done. So that was a success.
Well, they haven't secured the border. Okay.
So
the Instagram.
Oh, wait a minute. No, you can't just say they haven't.
No, I'm not. I'm about to explain why I'm saying that. I'm not. I'm about to explain. The Instagram post that they used to claim that came from Fox News, and it compared.
Oh, so Fox News, because you don't like where it came from, the source came from, it must be false.
If you'd let me finish.
Well, you can't say. Look at the numbers.
Why would they use Fox?
Under Biden, they were crossing the border.
Yes, I know.
Now
They used the first.
And you tell me that's not better.
I'm telling you what they used. They used an Instagram post from Fox News that compared the total number of the last 7 days of Biden's presidency to the average per day under Trump, and those numbers.
Look at the total under Biden.
And those numbers were recorded before the tariffs kicked in.
Numbers under Biden. Look at the daily numbers under Biden.
Let's pretend you're right. Okay, you're absolutely right.
Okay,
now carry on. Why the Canada stuff?
So there's one.
Why the Canada stuff?
Well, let me continue with Mexico. Mexico Honda were building car plants in Mexico and just bringing the cars across the border. He's put a tariff on there. Now Honda are building their new Honda Civic factory in Indiana, so that's bringing jobs back to America. The taxes on Canada are partly, again, it's to secure the border, to stop the fentanyl coming across the border.
There is no. Okay, carry on.
Okay. Oh no, there must not be because you said so.
Yeah.
You know better.
No, you definitely know better.
So it's also reciprocal because Canada's got massive taxes on American stuff like dairy. They've got 200% tariffs on dairy.
Yeah.
So it's partly reciprocal, and it's also to stop China from bringing steel across from Canada.
Okay, can we do this now?
You can do whatever you want.
What did Donald Trump describe as the greatest trade deal in history?
You tell me.
No, you must know.
Why must I know?
Okay, because it was the deal under which the dairy tariffs were introduced. Guess who negotiated it?
Who?
Go on, have a guess. It's pretty obvious. I'm playing with you.
Is it?
What?
Is it obvious?
Yeah.
All right.
Go on.
No idea.
Donald Trump.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's good.
And then he called it the best trade deal ever made. He signed it in 2018. And you know what a threshold is?
Yeah.
So the threshold above which tariffs become payable, up until that threshold, there are no tariffs at all. How many times do you think that threshold above which tariffs on dairy are payable has been reached?
You tell me.
Well, are you going to believe me, or are you going to accuse me of...
It depends where you're getting your sources from. I might need to go and check your sources.
Okay.
Maybe CNN.
Well, it's on the record. The White House wouldn't deny it. But I think you know the answer, Stephen. I think you've worked it out.
No, go tell me.
Never.
Never?
Ever.
So
at risk of turning into the All Saints, the stuff that you believe is true has never happened.
So there isn't any Chinese steel coming across?
No, we're talking about... I can only pick these things off one at a time, all right?
Right.
So the stuff you believe about dairy tariffs in Canada was not only negotiated by Donald Trump and described as the greatest trade deal in history. It has never actually seen a 200% tariff on dairy products imported from the US imposed because they don't even reach half.
What percentage has it seen?
They don't even reach half. It's free.
I'm asking you again. What percentage has it seen?
I'm telling you again. None. It's free until it reaches the tariff threshold. It's tariff free. That's what a trade agreement.
So there's never been any tariffs paid on.
Not since Donald Trump negotiated this trade deal. But what interests me, Stephen, and I hope you don't mind me asking this question, is how you expect to find this stuff out after you've come on a radio station, convinced that you've got all your ducks in a row. So, would you mind telling me where you got your information from?
Various places, social media, news networks.
Yeah, but some examples. So specifically on the Canadian tariff stuff, you've swallowed something that is so fundamentally and obviously untrue that you could probably...
It's not untrue.
You could probably see it from space. So Donald Trump negotiated...
It's not untrue if there's tariffs on US dairy.
But they're not being paid, and Donald Trump negotiated it. So just let me pin down, if I may, the various sources that you rely on.
Anything online?
Literally anything.
Well, anything, yeah. There's various news articles.
Anything?
News articles, there you go, news articles.
By whom?
I don't know. Go and Google it yourself.
Okay.
Right. So what other tariffs?
Well, hang on.
I'm not.
I don't want to let this go because I think it's really important. I don't get to speak to people like you very often anymore.
What do you mean by people like you?
People who believe everything they see online.
I don't believe everything I see.
Well, sorry, people who believe everything they see online except the true stuff.
Well, that's false.
Pardon?
That's false.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of what we'll take away from this conversation, who described the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement signed in 2018 as the best trade deal ever made?
Well, you said it was Donald Trump.
Yeah. But you believe everything that you hear or read online. So just pretend we're online. And then the second question is, how often has America been required to pay tariffs on dairy products that it is exporting into Canada?
I don't know. You said none.
I said never. And you believe everything that you hear online. So now you go away, you'll look something up, and it will be false, and it will not be true, and then you'll believe that as well.
What other tariffs is there on American products?
Why do you keep saying that? You've completely lost your status, if you like, as a valid contributor to the programme, because the first things that you said have been proved completely false.
Well, I'll need to go and look that up. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't.
Yeah, but you're not going to care. You're going to believe what you want to believe.
Okay.
You're going to believe what you want to believe.
No, if I can find that.
Okay, so what's your most trusted news source?
There's various ones online.
But what's your most trusted?
I don't have a most trusted.
All right, top 10.
I don't have a top 10 either.
Give me one that's in your top 100. Just so I can go and have a look at it. Say again?
Breitbart News.
Okay. Have a great day, Stephen.
You have a fantastic day.
It's 10:45 and they walk among us.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. I guess because, trusted news sources are important. Just a couple of other fact checks on the last caller. There are no plans by Honda to build a new plant in Indiana. It is they already build Hondas there. It's been there since 2007, and they have said themselves, Honda have said themselves, that they have no plans to build a new plant. It was in a speech by Donald Trump, which I guess is about as reliable a news source as Breitbart, that he said already numerous car companies have announced that they will be building massive automobile plants in America, with Honda just announcing a new plant in Indiana, one of the largest anywhere in the world. That's a lie. But it's a lie that some people, even in Glasgow, want to believe. And that is perhaps another area for inquiry. Do you know that it was in the same speech that he claimed under Biden, the federal government was spending $8 million for making mice transgender? I've told you about this one already. And then, I tell you, it happened again. So yesterday I saw the photograph of the kind of sales crib sheet that the President of the United States of America was holding at a White House photo opportunity in the hope of helping his sort of de facto deputy to sell cars. Literally a Tesla crib sheet saying the grey one is 40,000, the red one is 90,000, and here are some selling points. The sort of thing that you would, if you were on work experience on a car dealership's forecourt. It's the kind of thing you'd be carrying around in your hand. And I did a double take. I thought to myself, that can't be true. But it was. And then I saw something on official headed White House notepaper. I wonder if we can dig it out again. On a White House notepaper about the transgenic mice, which said the president was right, brackets, as he always is, or as he so often is. And this was a claim that $8 million had been spent under Biden on making mice transgender, when what it actually involved was making mice transgenic. And transgenic simply means that you can introduce DNA to a mouse from another organism. So when you saw that mouse with an ear growing on its back a few years ago that could then be removed and transplanted onto a human who had lost their ear, that's what transgenic mice are for. But Trump not only lies about it, and these lies are not just believed in the Republican base, they're also believed in Glasgow. If you've just tuned in, I'm not picking on Glasgow, it's where the last caller came from. They're not only believed, but then they double down on the lie and put out on official White House stationery the claim that what he said was actually true. So, that it sounded a little bit fanciful when we first started talking about the destruction of objective truth, or how the first thing you have to do if you're a fascist is destroy shared reality. Here we are. 10 to 11 is the time. So what is he up to? If there is a plan, what is it? Matt's in Westcliff-on-Sea. Matt, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Matt.
My sort of take on it really is the fact that I think what we're watching now is mainly down to the fact that we're dealing with narcissism. He's the king of narcissism.
Yeah.
When they went out, when they started to do this, particularly on the inauguration, remember he was standing there with all his billionaire buddies, looking very tough. Everyone needs to kiss the ring. I don't think they expected.
Stop appealing to my inner 12-year-old, please, Matt. Thank you. Carry on.
I don't think they expected not just Canada, but a lot of the world, but even the European Union, to react to the narcissists, to the bullies, the way that they have. And I think Canada is kind of like the kid in the class that really stands out to that. And I think the trouble with narcissism is they don't really plan. They just expect things to happen. And it hasn't happened.
What hasn't happened?
To Canada to just give up.
So they thought everyone was going to fold over and acquiesce?
I think Donald Trump lives in a world where he thinks everybody does that. Except when they don't, which is when he goes bankrupt or gets convicted of felony. Exactly. And that I think in years to come, of course, the way this is going, probably in weeks to come, but in years to come, I think you'll look at Canada and go, "Oh yeah, that's how you do it."
Well, we'll still see.
That's what they're doing.
So the madness, I can't criticise anyone for not getting all the way there because I haven't got all the way there myself. But the madness. No, I'm not there. Nobody gets the actual plan except him, and if he hasn't got one, then we're all doomed.
I don't think he has got one. I think certain people, particularly Musk, has got a plan. I don't think if you look at Donald Trump throughout the years, I don't think he has a plan other than the fact that he's just so crazy inside. He's just so narcissistic that I've met.
So what does success look like then?
Total power.
Total power. And so we're back to the dichotomy between either he's doing it because he has to at somebody else's behest, or it is all part of a plan to assume a kind of profoundly un-American authoritarian regime. Whether or not he expects or hopes that will extend beyond his presidential term or not doesn't really matter, because the damage that's done from the duration or through the duration would be complete.
Would be complete. And it also, as far as time is, at the moment, if you look worldwide, if you compare China to the United States, even before Trump, financially and looking forward, America, United States, is the cornered animal. And there's nothing more dangerous than the cornered animal. Yeah. And then you've got a narcissist in charge.
Okay. I mean, these words pop up a lot, don't they? And I think first time round, Trump 1.0, I balked at them slightly because we don't have the diagnostic qualifications, you and I. I don't think you do. I hope I'm not doing you a grave disservice. We don't have the diagnostic qualifications to say that is narcissism from a medical point of view, but in the absence of any other explanations, these work. Anthony's reminded of Boris Johnson wanting to be world king when he was a child. I don't know if he's ever grown out of that view, but of course Trump described him as Britain Trump. So there is definite crossover there, which is why I mentioned COVID at the beginning of this hour, and that sense we had, the sense that, can I say normal people? Is that unfair? The sense that normal people had, that nobody would be marching into this battlefield. In the case of COVID, the enemy was clear and on the horizon. In the case of what Trump is doing, it's hard to pin down precisely who the enemy is in his own mind, except, the radicalized online right words like globalist or immigrants or it's Americans are going to get hurt by these tariffs, nobody else. Well, obviously everybody's going to get hurt by them, but Americans are at the front of the queue. Because they'll be hit both ways. The idea that there is a sort of template. There are notes that he consults that don't just contain the list of prices of Tesla cars. Everything. Well, if we do this, you know what I mean? Like tactics, strategy. That's the word I've spent 55 minutes looking for. The idea that there is no strategy whatsoever is impossible for us to accept almost as humans. I think this is psychological. May even be evolutionary. There's no strategy whatsoever. That's why I began the programme by talking about COVID. The idea that Boris Johnson was approaching the COVID crisis with no strategy whatsoever. The idea that the most important person in the room was the last person that he spoke to, even if the last person that he spoke to was proposing something that was the polar opposite of what he was behind yesterday because of the person he spoke to before the last person that he spoke to. We can't accept that. We refuse to believe that our systems can deliver the most glittering prizes, the most powerful positions to people who have no plan and no strategy, that we're simply rewarding demagoguery or a perception of charisma, or, of course, in the case of both of those political leaders, just blatant lies that people wanted to hear. 10:56 is the time. And a few of you pointing out, James perhaps most pertinently with references as well, that those who do have the qualifications to make these diagnoses have indeed concluded that he suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. But it doesn't help us to understand that. Perhaps it helps us stop trying to find answers to the question of whether or not there is method in his madness. Misha is in Wimbledon. Misha, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thank you very much. First-time caller, so a bit nervous. No, I'd like to say that there is a strategy behind all this madness, as you describe it. And it's important to understand that the U.S. policy at the moment, driven by ideology, by the ideas, not by the kind of economic logic or Trump ego or something like that. There's three ideas, one in foreign policy, one in domestic policy, and one in economics. So in foreign policy, the idea is the world would be safer if it would be divided between three supernuclear power, namely USA, Russia, China.
Yeah.
The domestic policy is the idea that 4 or 8 years is simply not enough for President of the United States to implement the long-term policy. And if you look in the other countries like UK, France, Germany, Russia, China, it's not 8 years, it's much longer,
Yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah.
And the idea in economics is that the artificial intelligence will transform the labor market to the extent that the income tax would be not sufficient enough to fund the government spending, because we are potentially talking about mass unemployment, etc., etc. So the income tax should be replaced with something which will allow the government to run.
Yeah.
And this is it could be income tax on the wealth, or it could be rising corporation tax, which Donald will never do. So the simple kind of answer is tariffs. So if you look on this, on everything what's going on,
do you think that he understands what you're saying?
Of course.
Okay.
If you know about Project 2025.
No, I do, but I mean, not only did he deny that existed while he was campaigning, but
come on. By the way, I'm clinical psychologist, so
no,
I can.
Misha, I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing with everything you say. I just think it's more the people pulling his strings that are perhaps plotting what you described than him.
It's not his ideas.
No,
it's not his
but
ideas.
I'm not sure he understands them.
I mean, no, he doesn't understand it properly, and that's why you see some fluffing up and down and talking some nonsenses, because he's sitting on this meeting with these people who created this idea, and being a complete idiot, he simply doesn't understand what's going on. So he heard some words, he heard some ideas, and then he come to the public and say nonsense, because, yes, he's idiot, unfortunately. So... yeah, but it's not a madness. I think it's important for people to understand. And
well, I mean, there's two things you can look at. You can look at the literature surrounding Project 2025, and there's a book which, again, I used to go tinfoil hat at this point. There's a book written, I don't know if you know about it, Misha, by Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad, called The Sovereign Individual, which essentially posits a future very similar to the one that you describe, a kind of decentralization on an epic scale, self-ownership, great news for people who've got a lot to own, appalling news for people who don't, a sort of cyber-feudalism if you like. The book was written years ago. It was published in 1997, I think, when Tony Blair came into power. And it was republished in 2020, just 5 years ago. And do you know who wrote the preface when it was republished in 2020?
No, I don't know.
Peter Thiel.
Who is that?
Peter Thiel is the guy who is sort of, he out-Musks Musk, the guy who is supposed to be the biggest architect of all of Project 2025, or one of the biggest beneficiaries of this idea. So I don't know what the next stage is, mate. Do you? How do we sort of stop normality bias? How do we stop ourselves from thinking, you may draw on your academic training a bit here, how do we stop ourselves from thinking the threat can't be that bad? Because I don't know where you're from originally, but because
Russia. I'm from Russia.
Well, then maybe you find it easier to believe that the threat can be that bad than someone who's grown up in the West does.
I mean, I didn't read the book you mentioned, but I wrote the book 1984. Yeah.
Yes.
So I kind of tend to believe that the world would be in much more danger if it would be divided between, say, Russia and China. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And they've said that bit out loud. They've said the bit out loud about Europe having been denuded or robbed of its relevance, robbed of its power. I personally don't think it's true, but I do know that if you wanted to create that future geopolitically and internationally, then the first thing you'd have to do is get one of the biggest members of the European Union out of the European Union. And how many people were dancing around the room a few years ago about how closely the Trump campaign echoed the Brexit campaign? Why do you think Trump had to sort of spoil some of his parties by inviting Nigel Farage? I can't imagine he enjoys his company, but he wanted a little bit of that demagoguery, that idea that, no, if you put the effort in and you've got the right support, you can actually persuade a population to vote against its own interests. And once you're over the line, once the vote has been secured, they've got absolutely no power to stop you from doing whatever it is that you really want to do, or to stop the ball that you've set in motion from rolling in directions that you don't want it to roll in. Makes Brexit look like chicken feed, what Trump is doing at the moment, because it's deliberate. It's not a consequence of a terrible mistake, unless, of course, you're a voter. Unless you voted for him and you're watching him essentially plunge your country into recession. For what? For personal gain? We may continue with this, we may not. It's the kind of tension I like to build before doing this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:06. Let's continue in this area. There will be, no doubt, even perhaps some breaking news in this field. There's a possibility of a ceasefire in Ukraine, of course, after Zelensky completely rejected Donald Trump's attempts to force him into a complete capitulation. The pendulum seems to have swung back, so they've now said yes to a 30-day ceasefire, while it will fall to Donald Trump to prove that he has Vladimir Putin in his pocket, as he has repeatedly claimed in the context of pledging that peace would be achieved on day one of his administration. But hey, who's counting? I don't know that there's a phone in that idea of tariff negotiation. And we are currently affected by tariffs, probably because of all the fentanyl crossing the Atlantic and making its way into America. I don't know. But the EU is retaliating, and we are not. I would cautiously suggest, because we can't really. The imbalance between us and the United States is too huge to pick a fight, whereas the European Union can. And indeed is, or not picking a fight, but is retaliating, picking up the thrown gauntlet, you might say, whereas we are not. The Tories, who have the great benefit of being in opposition, although, of course, that's largely cancelled out by being led by Kemi Badenoch, can make comments, as you heard in the news, about why you should go there and try and negotiate it. But you might as well say that, I tell you what, I'm the shadow business secretary. I'm the Conservative spokesman on international trade. I think Jonathan Reynolds should get a lamp. I think he should go to a bazaar in Marrakesh or Istanbul and buy a lamp and rub it vigorously until a genie appears. And at that point, the genie will grant him 3 wishes. And if the Conservatives were in power, those 3 wishes would be that Donald Trump exempts the United Kingdom from his current tariffs, that peace in Ukraine is achieved to the satisfaction of everybody on the planet, and that Kemi Badenoch becomes a brilliant orator who never makes gaffes and never has to apologise because she never actually ends up with her foot in her mouth. I mean, it is the most meaningless of contributions to public discourse for an opposition party to say, well, then the Labour Party should do this impossible thing. But I don't know that there's a topic in asking what they should be doing instead, because I think, once again, we find ourselves in that vexed and unfamiliar territory of watching a diminished post-Brexit United Kingdom doing the only thing it can do in the knowledge that it will almost, but not completely, but almost certainly fail. This is good, from Bill. I've thought about the question you are asking a lot. And I've come to the conclusion that even asking the question itself, why is he doing this, assumes that he must have a master plan. The very question credits him with intelligence. I've concluded there is no reason for anything he does except megalomania. He's totally reactionary or reactive. He makes rules expecting people to follow them because it makes him feel important. When they don't or won't, he'll either cut them out of his circle or double down on the rules, or, Bill, I'd add, or just pretend he'd never made the rules in the first place, because he backtracks on the tariffs like a child at a birthday party doing the hokey cokey. The 50% tariffs, were they announced yesterday or the day before? They're back down to 25% again. But hey-ho, very stable genius. He has no strategy except to demand respect, which he so desperately craves and believes he can earn simply by demanding it. And of course he gets it. He gets a form of respect. He gets a form of obeisance, if that's the right word. It's a lovely word, that. I should probably have checked the definition before using it out loud. Because he's surrounded by people who deep down he knows what they think of him, but they are prevented by circumstances from saying so. And that's going to extend to journalists soon. That guy from MSNBC was not, in fact, we might listen to that again before we dive back into this subject. He wasn't exaggerating when he said he fears for his job. They've already backed down, many of the big media organizations, on simple statements of fact, because Donald Trump has made it clear through his lawyers that he is unhappy with them, referring to his legal cases and the libel case he brought against the woman that had accused him of rape, and he lost. So you don't need a master's in jurisprudence to join the dots on what that means. The court found. But major US broadcasters have settled with him rather than repeat the obvious conclusion of what those two facts deliver. I mean, it puts people like me in a tricky situation. I don't want my employer to get sued by Donald Trump for me telling the truth, because the inconvenience, to say the very least, would be considerable. But we manage, don't we? We plot our course through this minefield rather expertly, with the enormous help of the occasional exploding mine like Stephen in Glasgow. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. The reason why this man says that he might be jeopardizing his job by telling the truth is because it's true.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs. And now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it. And the trouble, Kelly, is that it shows there are no bounds around President Trump. This is very different from the first administration, where there were people around him who seemed to, I don't know what the word is, but smooth over some of the edges now. And the other thing that's not talked about, Kelly, is what's going on within the administration in terms of how they're treating the Constitution and laws. I think all of that is bad for the attraction of capital. And the gentleman from Bridgewater is 100% right. We need massive amounts of capital if we want to fund our deficits, pay for the things we want to pay for, sell our bonds, and have high stock prices. And it seems as if this administration is doing everything it can to chase foreign capital away.
Well, and we could go into the strategy of the insanity as a strategy in terms of our trading
Insanity is not a strategy.
Insanity is not a strategy. So what is the strategy? I mean, but maybe is there? I mean, if insanity is the strategy, what is the end game? What does success look like? Or am I doing that thing that I told you we were going to have to stop doing, where I'm bringing a toolbox full of tools forged during the post-war settlement, forged during Pax Americana, analytical tools that have been useful since 1945 probably, but they are no use at all when it comes to trying to make sense of this. I don't know, a bit like being a pathologist and they wheel an alien into the room, and none of your biological training counts for anything anymore. Because when you open it up, the organs bear no resemblance whatsoever. You don't even know what they're organs. I mean, it's utterly, utterly alien. Like, that's what it feels like sometimes. And yet, what else do you do? What else do you do? Do you do the do you do the thing that sometimes I think they want you to do, and look the other way? Have a phone-in on what most exotic animal you've ever been attacked by might be? That was fun, actually. We should do more of that stuff, particularly as the deep end of the news agenda gets soupier and soupier. But there it is. I mean, if you were, apart from people who are, you know, I say this with a modicum of generosity, the radicalised online right who've been persuaded that they can't trust the people telling the truth and they can trust the people telling lies. They are very hard to reach, but you can't stop trying. Okay? It just goes back to Kellyanne Conway describing lies as alternative facts. Still don't think people fully appreciated what a moment that was. If you take that and January the 6th, anybody still supportive of Donald Trump is by definition accelerating and contributing to the collapse of core values, core Western values that have kept us safe for generations. But the failure, if you like, of these tools means you should be looking for new ones. I don't know what they look like. How do you answer? It's like that line from The Sound of Music. How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you analyse a problem like Trump? You see the temptation to stop. Where is it? Where is it? 11:15 is the time. You might be bringing a toolbox, James, writes James, but the only tool Trump possesses is a hammer. That's a bit Faragey as well, isn't it? They're very good at breaking things, these people. But what are they going to build with the pieces? And that's why I thought Misha's call, I thought the key question to Misha was, do you think Trump understands this? Is he capable? Do you think he thinks beyond 2 hours? Do you think he actually has plans ahead, apart from the atavistic urges for revenge and the appetites, the insatiable appetites for power, for money, for greed, for burgers? This insatiable ogre-like appetites. A brilliant piece by the author Edward Docks about a month ago you should look up, using the ogre as an emblem throughout history, throughout literature, throughout the canon. The ogre is a powerful figure, but almost a vessel for insatiable and unchecked appetites. And that's where maybe you begin to understand some of the appeal. Why would somebody sitting in their mum's back bedroom in Bognor Regis in a dirty bathrobe with a second-hand laptop feel that Donald Trump, because he thinks that if he's allowed to do it, if he's allowed to just pursue his appetites without any checks and balances from all the traditional ways in which we've kept civilization afloat, whether it's religion encouraging people not to be their worst version of themselves, whether it's the law encouraging people not to be the worst version of themselves, whether it's shame encouraging people not to be the worst version of themselves. People who really, really, really want to be the worst version of themselves, they're going to love these men. And that, I guess, is why Donald Trump, Andrew Tate are part of the same phenomenon. Someone giving you permission to be the very worst version of yourselves. And in the case of Tate, as we saw yesterday, in that hideous, hideous court case, it's misogyny. It's men who are desperate to be able to treat women with absolute contempt. That's what you appeal to, the worst version of someone. But I don't see that in the context of economic policy. I see that in the context of how he keeps afloat, how he has support, how he has votes. People want to be the worst version of themselves. The economic equivalent, I'm really greedy. I've got more than I could ever possibly need. But guess what, pal? I want more. I want what you've got, even though you've got much less than me. The worst version of yourselves. I don't like brown people. Well, we're going to ban all Muslims from America. The worst version of yourself. It's a little bit naive to reflect upon how much effort Judeo-Christian values over the millennia have put into encouraging us to be the best version of ourselves. Abrahamic religions, you can include Islam in that. Unless, of course, you're a racist, in which case you can't. So this alternative, and that's why they talk about Judeo-Christian values. They always project, they always promote the precise opposite of what they're actually doing. You know, Farage talking about Judeo-Christian values when the polar opposite of the parable of the Good Samaritan, the polar opposite of thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, the polar opposite of everything that Jesus taught. These people daily enact. And I guess everybody who hates the constraints that civilization puts on their own behavior, whether it's with relation to greed or whether it's with relation to women or whether it's relation to the vulnerable, the disabled, the foreign, the other, the desperate, if people just want to set fire to hotels full of refugees because it makes them feel good, then these men are giving them permission. But none of that makes sense of the economic stuff that's going on as we speak. Literally as we speak. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So, if there is a plan, what is it? And if there is no plan, what's the plan? You see what I did there? If there's no plan, why do it? If there's no plan, why not just sit in the White House eating cheeseburgers all day while people come and tell you that you're wonderful? He could do that, couldn't he? You know, what is the plan? Why the chaos? Why the insanity described by the guy from CNBC a moment ago? It's fascinating, isn't it? Oh, got a caller from Canada. Dan's in Newfoundland. Dan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Just like to say, and I appreciate you suggesting earlier about the tariffs that are many times incorrect. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. I know I usually interrupt, Dan, but I occasionally let people speak for a minute before I jump all over them.
No problem. I just happy that you talked about that, because a lot of people don't understand. They hear about the dairy tariffs, 200%, and the tariffs on eggs and different things, poultry, but really there's thresholds that are in place there, and unless you actually trade above those thresholds, the tariffs never get enacted. So nothing has been paid for those, but that's a soundbite that the Trump, Navarro, and people like Lutnick, people like those seem to talk about.
And they must know it's not true. They must know what we know, but they also know that their audience is, if you pardon the dairy-based pun, Dan, their audience is lapping it up.
Yes. The thing is that they have no other argument. The initial tariffs that we incurred here in Canada was because of fentanyl, and I mean, come on, let's be realistic here. We realize, it's such a minuscule amount, and even that withstanding, the Canadian government has acted on what the Trump administration wanted them to do, to appoint the border czar and to spend an inordinate and exorbitant amount of money to chase a problem that never really existed, and then still that wasn't good enough.
Just to pretend that it's true in order to make the tariffs go away, and then of course the tariffs didn't go away.
And then the tariffs, then they rescinded the tariffs, and they're back on again. This schizophrenic type of behavior.
They doubled them and then undoubled them, doubled them, then halved them again. So it leads us all to the question of what you think he's playing at.
I really have no idea. I do believe that. I do believe, James, that he's following William McKinley's playbook. Back in the turn of the 20th century, that worked out terribly. With the protectionists and the tariffs, and he talks about McKinley a lot.
Yes, he does.
And we all know what happened to McKinley. So.
You say that. I think in Canada you're probably a little bit more up on it than perhaps the average Brit is. But I'd recommend the David McWilliams podcast on this, Trump tariffs and the gold rush, the McKinley playbook. I know David. He's an Irish journalist, a brilliant, one of the few people to predict the financial crash of 2008. So anybody listening to this who wants to know more about what Dan is referencing, check out the David McWilliams podcast. Episode 11 this year came out at the beginning of February. So I mean, in his own mind, he thinks he's going to enrich America. It's almost comforting to think that, even if he's horribly wrong, because there is a there is a reason to the rhyme. There is a method to the madness.
Yes, I mean, I guess so. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, I think he's sort of sees himself now as a modern day emperor that's going to. Recreate history that people are going to be reading about these generations in America for years, and how we changed America and revitalized the American dream. But I mean, it's we can all see what's happening. It's just going so horribly, and it's going to continue.
And the Canadian response is perhaps one of the most pertinent in the context of how horribly it's going, because it's so completely at odds with what he must have been hoping or expecting to happen. It's what is it, an epic misjudgment of the Canadian people, an epic misjudgment of the Canadian spirit, or just a complete failure to understand reality?
Well, I think it's just a capitulation. I really think that this initial thing with the tariffs is a way to They're looking at the tax breaks that they want to enact and how they're going to pay for those. So easy fix, to get income revenue right away is Mexico, Canada tariffs, and I think that they figure, the Canadians, Mexicans squawk for a little bit, but that they'll just because they're just going to capitulate.
And
but,
if you,
Canadians are. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I'm just saying Canada is so united with this and really angry. Yeah. I mean, I've never seen the vitriol that I've witnessed amongst colleagues, friends, people I know right across the country. It's just we cannot believe that we're being treated this way. We're just completely gobsmacked because from a financial and a logical sense, it just doesn't add up.
Well, that's the point. Yeah, there it is. It just doesn't add up.
The whole economy down.
Yeah, and we have this human impulse to make it add up. It has to add up. It's happening in the White House. It's the pinnacle of Western democracy. This guy is the most powerful in the world, arguably. It must add up. It can't just not add up, which is exactly how I felt at the outbreak of COVID. It can't be as chaotic as it appears. Even if it is chaotic, there must be a method in the madness. Coming round in circles, but it's nice to do so in the company of a Canadian, Dan. Thank you. Paul's been in touch. He says, I'm listening on catch-up, James, but Canada doesn't charge the 200% tariffs on US dairy, as the imports never reach the limit before the tariffs kick in. Paul, mate, you're in for a treat in about 2 minutes' time, if that text has just dropped at the moment in the programme where I think it's dropping. So I'm now saying hello to you from the future. I'm like Marty McFly. I'm saying hello to when you reach this bit. I don't need roads. I don't need roads to do this. Where I'm from, we don't need roads. A little hello from the future for you there, Paul, because when you get to the end of the segment that you're currently listening to, you'll realise that though helpful, your message was not necessarily needed, but I always like help. I always like help with the fact checks. 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to contribute to the question that we're asking. And it's twofold, and it hasn't changed, and it gets more interesting the longer we go on. But arguably, if there is any light at the end of the tunnel, either it's a train coming towards us at 100 miles an hour, or it's just inching ever further away. Is there any method to the madness? If there is, what is it? And if there isn't, what is going on? And how can people like the ones that Dan referred to, Peter Navarro, be going along with it? You know why Peter Thiel might be going along with it. He's the founder of PayPal, richer than any man in history has any need to be. An extraordinary history of I don't know quite how you describe it, really. The lawsuits alone make him fascinating, but he's one of those people that seems to believe that because society is essentially upheld by taxes, and that the biggest obstacle to the richest people in the world becoming the richest people in the history of everything is taxes, then it's taxes that are the problem. It's society that is the problem. It is 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33, and this Peter Thiel guy is one that you should definitely be finding more out about. Thiel. Founded PayPal, spent time in South Africa growing up, including, I read somewhere, in a town where outward expressions of support for the Nazis were still permissible, indeed encouraged well into the 20th century. He's written about his belief that, he has said that he has come to I'm quoting now, no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible, largely because of welfare beneficiaries and women in general. He thinks that the world is moving towards a new space for freedom, end quotes, beyond current politics. He's written about all of this stuff. And if you look at some of the stuff that Trump has done, particularly in the arena of diversity, equity and inclusion, the idea that people who are not wealthy and white do not deserve to be treated with equity or indeed offered inclusion, gathering enormous pace, probably really quickly. When the dust settles on the early days of the Trump administration, some of the stuff they've done in this field will stand comparison with what was going on in 1930s Germany. It just will. That's not an opinion, that's counting. So why? Maybe that's part of the answer, but we're not fully across understanding that yet, I don't think. Dean is in Grimsby. Dean, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, you pick your moments. A nice, easy one for you, Dean. Explain to me the full workings of Donald Trump's mind.
Right, I'll tell you then. Okay. Why I've been wanting to ring for a number of days was I've been listening to LBC for the past week, and I hear people talking about strategies and plans and chess and all the rest of it. I got to do it at the weekend. I was really annoyed. I nearly rang then. But the point to know about it is, if we assume that this diagnosis of narcissistic personality is correct, and I have to be a little bit careful about what I say, that is not a trivial thing.
No.
It's a pervasive disorder that... oh, God.
So is that. That sounds like it. Speaking of pervasive disorders, Dean, I hope you're all right. Carry on.
Yeah. That impacts every part of his life. You know, it's one of the most profound and serious personality disorders you could possibly have. And in addition to that, when you look at him, he's an extreme outlier. He's on the extreme right-hand side of the bell curve, even for people with that diagnosis. So there is no plan. He does everything because it feels good. That is it.
So we're wasting our time. I mean, the simple. I sense you're speaking from a degree of professional expertise, but for those of us who have none, the simple understanding of it is that you have an unreasonably high sense of your own importance. That could apply to lots of people. You need and seek attention on an epic industrial scale. The desperation for admiration is impossible to exaggerate. You almost certainly don't care about the feelings of others. You lack empathy, and you mask it with epic confidence and constant repetition about how brilliant you are. And in contrast to all of that, your skin is so thin that you get upset by even the slightest criticism. Possibly explains Elon Musk as well, actually.
I don't think so, no. And I don't think there's a comparison with Boris either.
Fair enough.
There's a difference with people who are a bit narcissistic.
Yes.
I could be a bit narcissistic. You could, James.
Wash your mouth out, Dean. How dare you? I mean, mate, speak for yourself. I take your point, as opposed to a fundamental part. I mean, as opposed
it's
something
really,
you do
really
as opposed to what you are.
Yeah. And you see a lot of psychiatrists as well and mental health professionals don't have a lot of experience of it. I mean, I've seen 3-4 cases probably in 30-odd years.
Right.
They're always really, really extreme, because why would they go see a health professional?
Yeah.
Because obviously they're perfect. They don't need help.
Yeah.
So the thing to understand is that it's what feels, is impulsive, it feels good at the time. So when policy is being made by tweets, so you imagine him, you know, in the White House, he'd be very high maintenance. He's wanting constant attention. Yes. It's always too hot. It's always too cold. Come here, come there. Yeah. So he's got his audience. He's got a captive audience. Policy's being made when he's left on his own by tweet. He's tweeting in the dark watches of the night.
Often on the toilet.
He's on his own.
Often on the toilet, Dean. I'm not joking.
Is that where he is?
Apparently he does a lot of his tweeting on the toilet.
Yeah. It's when he's on his own.
That's it, isn't it? It's the only time he's ever behind a locked door, behind a closed door.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So that's why he does it. And the thing about Putin is he's a dictator, isn't he?
Yes.
I'm sure Trump sees him as a father figure, and he looks a bit like his dad. His dad was a malevolent psychopath who acted as a dictator in his business. He was dictatorial, we understand, with his children.
Massive racist.
And he's looking for that authority. And I don't think there's any great plan with that. And I don't know if he's even conscious of it. But he's got absolutely no morals. So if Putin's saying to him, come on our side and we'll give you 100 billion, 200 billion, he'll do it, won't he?
I don't know. I mean, I guess if he's not got any internal compass pointing him towards what is right or what is good or what is beneficial or anything beyond ultimate weapons-grade self-interest, then yeah, then he would. I mean, the only bit of your analysis I don't have a picture in my mind of Donald Trump's dad to compare, to see whether, I mean, because as I said at the beginning, we're in a vacuum, so pretty much anything is allowed. But does he really look like Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump's dad?
He's the same. He's the same kind of genotype. You know, his dad was quite drawn with a moustache.
Yeah.
And had that psychopathic, non-blinking stare.
There's one picture where, I that kind of big, but very, very far back hairline and the quite sort of drawn features, as you described. Genotype's a good word. I'll be using that in the future. And therefore, you think that everybody is. I mean, there are people who think he's got a strategy because they are down the rabbit hole, because they are persuading themselves that there's a strategy because they love the invitation that he gives them to be the worst version of themselves. I don't know that that's a necessary side effect of narcissistic personality disorder, but
I think what it is I think it's the same as all racists or anybody like that.
Yeah.
Is particularly in the States, these are people who've, they've not made the transition. I mean, the States have had an economy where you don't have to be particularly intelligent, but, you can have a good life. These are people who haven't succeeded in whatever way it is, or they're not as successful as they think they should be. So it has to be somebody else's fault. So that's either the immigrant or the Democrats or whoever it is. And they've invested in it. And, I mean, it's going to come up because it's going to go through the roof, isn't it?
Yeah, and
he's going to be seen to have betrayed his base. But he doesn't care. He doesn't care about being a good president or America or anything like that. He doesn't care about that. He cares about what feels good at the time.
Entirely.
And
that's really
that's
strong.
what I think.
How long have you been thinking that?
Since 2016.
Really? So since he
I used
believed...
to really like The Apprentice.
Right.
And, with our lad, whatever he's called.
Alan Sugar.
And so I put the American version on, and it was within 30 seconds, it was like, God, that guy's narcissistic. Wow. I mean, people imagine that there's something really arcane or almost magical about doing assessing somebody or doing a diagnosis.
Yes.
There isn't. I mean, assessing Donald Trump, if he walked into, my clinic when I was, a year ago when I was working, it'd be the easiest day's work you've ever done.
Right.
Somebody would have come up to you and said, this, just like, your 10:30 Dean, there's an 80-year-old bloke there, he's just had a go at reception because he's not going to be seen it instantly, and he's painted orange. You might want to have somebody in the assessment with you.
He's refusing to sit in the waiting room with all the other people. He thinks he should have his own. Thinks he should have his own waiting room. Good Lord. Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I can't find much fault in any of it, really. And you draw upon experience of a tiny number of people, which is where he sits on the scale, that far extremity. And if you were to undo his behaviour in the hope of finding fault in Dean's analysis, I really think you'd struggle. So many things point towards what you described. The fact that he can say the polar opposite... Hang on, let me...
I've assessed...
Yeah.
Sorry, mate.
No, you carry on, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I've only seen, a few people even remotely like it within that, but he's like so far beyond where they were. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
You will never have met anybody like him.
So pick the thing you struggle with the most. Pick the thing you find hardest to understand. For me, it's probably the speed and the ease with which he can go from saying something to saying the opposite. Best recent example, probably calling Zelensky a dictator and then sitting in front of the world's media, sitting in front of the world at the White House press conference with Zelensky and saying with a completely straight face, with no shame whatsoever, I can't believe I said that. Did I say that? I didn't say that. Because in that moment, that served him best. That made him feel better. I loved it when I called him a dictator. It made me feel great when I called him a dictator. If I call him a dictator now in this room, I'm not going to feel great. So I'll say that I never called him a dictator.
Yeah, and that's the point, the complete absence of shame or guilt. Yeah, because you have to see people as being equal to you. Do you know what I mean? You have to be able to empathise in order to feel shame somehow.
Do you think he sees these mega rich barons as equal to him? Do you think he sees Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos as equal to him? Is he capable of that?
I think he sees them as being better than him because they've got more money, and that's the only way that he can measure worth. So the only people he respects are the people who are richer than him? Yeah. So that's why Putin's the richest man in the world. And he thinks Putin, and that's why, and I guess that's why he thinks Putin is a don. That and the daddy issues that you told us about. Yeah.
I bet you were good at your
That's all
job.
that matters.
I bet you were good at your job.
Yeah, I was, unfortunately. I was a bit too good. I was a bit too honest, really. But there you go.
It's the cross we bear.
6 years, it's enough for anybody, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Dean. We'll talk again. And if I could arrange a meeting between the two of you, then I'm pretty sure I could sell a few tickets. Dean, take care. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:47 is the time. That was amazing, wasn't it? I tempted to give Dean a Ray Liotta, but the quality of call is not a threshold for Ray Liotta. It's absurd level of qualification for making the call. He's terrified of Putin and Musk, isn't he? Just the only measure by which he judges people, wealth and power, adulation. He is simultaneously hypnotised and terrified by both of them, especially Putin. I wonder what Nigel Farage's excuse is for his fanboying of Vladimir Putin. Maybe he's got a very mild case of the same condition that Dean so expertly described. I don't know. But if that's all you care about, then it must be terrifying to encounter people who trump you, if you pardon the pun, on all of the shallow, cynical, inhumane measures that you deploy to assess human value. And the other point about the discrimination, I interviewed Carol Vorderman not long ago on stage. Carol is such a bright woman, such a clever person. The only bit, because it happened right at the end, that I wanted to pick up on further was when she talked about how much women have to fear in the event of a Trump presidency, in the event of Trump's policies continuing to spread. I'm not confused by it anymore. That's what happens when you want to give permission to men to be the worst versions of themselves. The first victims of that are women. And that's where he is now. It wasn't a made-up story, taking down evidence of the achievements of women in the military, actually removing it under these so-called DEI directives. Having most obviously a president who boasts about sexually assaulting women. Not a big enough alarm call for people on both sides of the Atlantic. And then you look at all the other things that weren't big enough alarm calls. January the 6th, I think most obviously, alternative facts. Pretty big alarm call. Grabbing women by the genitals, big enough. Multiple felonies, impeachments, crimes. All of these things, bankruptcies, obvious lies, proven dishonesties. None of them are a big enough alarm call. Then what is it you're getting, do you think? Think of your favourite pro-Trump British commentator. Most of them still on board. A couple have fallen off the bandwagon. But what are they getting out of it? Owning the libs. Is that what it is? Is that what Andrew Neil and people like that get out of this? Oh, I love it because he upsets all the right people. Isn't that the stupidest line you've ever heard in the context of the national interest? All these Brexiters, these Truss fanboys, these Boris Johnson acolytes. Oh, I love it because it upsets all the right people. How's that working out for you, lads? Seriously, how's it working out for you? How's austerity affected the country? How's Brexit unfolding? That Liz Truss fiscal event, that went well, did it for you? That was a win, was it? That was a big success. Oh, yeah, did a quick lap of honour on that one. Boris Johnson, stand-up guy, played a blinder, love him. Yeah, best Prime Minister we ever. Yeah, okay, right. And then Donald Trump, amazing. Can you find anyone who didn't go in for all five of those things? Who didn't go in for the full fistful of horrors? Oh, that's good. Write that down, Keith. The full fistful of horrors. If you liked austerity, then you liked Brexit. If you like Brexit, you like Johnson. If you like Johnson, you like Truss. And if you like all of the above, you like Trump. The fistful of horrors. Has anyone ever gone for just one of those, or three, or two, or one? Or is it always the full five? You have to go for the full fistful of horrors. You can tell I like that. I've said it 4 times now. I don't know. Anyway, enough from me. Nick's in Nottingham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think you're bang on. I think it's all connected. I like to call it RAGA.
Go on.
Rich and greedy anarchists.
Yeah, anarchy being an interesting addition to the formula.
That's it. And I think Trump is a useful idiot, and I think they've got 2 great prizes that he's working towards. Whether he knows it or not, I'm not sure. Yes. But the 2 prizes is to get rid of income tax, which obviously is progressive, replace it with sales tax, which is flat.
Yeah.
And, in this country it's VAT, in America it's tariffs. And they've been quite honest about that. They have actually said that publicly. And the other thing is just to degrade people's rights so that we can, so we all have to work longer for less and all the rest of it. So I do think it's a strategy. I think it's all connected.
But the why of it would be, just go to Hampton Court or something like that. Go just if you really don't understand why we're doing this, then just press rewind and return to a world where, an incredibly small number of people lived incredibly luxurious and privileged lives, and every single other person in the country or on the planet was working in service to them.
Exactly. It's just greed. I mean, the anarchy bit, they're not interested in democracy. They're not interested in law. I mean, we've seen that every day in America. But it's just about more and more money. And I do think it's connected. I also think, this is a little bit of a tangent.
Go on.
But I got a lot of the COVID. I was involved in a school and got a lot of COVID conspiracy nonsense.
Yes.
A lot of that was really well organised and really well thought through. And the idiots who were posting it through my door, they hadn't written it.
No.
So I think that was a practice at manipulation.
I was thinking about that today. I was literally thinking about vaccines. There's a story in The Atlantic about a little girl, a 6-year-old girl who's died from measles. And the journalist tracked them down, found the family, and you can fill in the rest yourself, but believing that these vaccines would do harm, regurgitating the stuff that you're talking to, the more you think about it, the more it does feel like a dress rehearsal.
I mean, I would get these 30, 40, 50-page documents, and I had about 20 of them posted through my door or emailed by people who clearly hadn't written them.
Yeah.
And it was all legal and Magna Carta and sovereign individual and all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah.
But somebody was pumping that out, and whoever it was knew enough about law.
Just to give it that veneer of plausibility that you need in order for a conspiracy theory to really take hold.
And I thought at the time, what's going on here? And there is something. So I do think it's all connected. I know that's kind of conspiracy and all the rest of it, but you can see the through line.
But it's not, is it? I mean, it's not conspiracy. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel founded PayPal together. It's what their fortunes are built on. Peter Thiel wrote a foreword to Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad's book, The Sovereign Individual, which posits the sort of collapse of society as we know it. He's written an essay about why he thinks that democracy and freedom have become incompatible. They are the richest men in the world, and they don't think they're rich enough. There's no need for the... I suffered from it as well, Nick. The conspiracy theory fear, the tinfoil hat alarm goes off sometimes, but you've just got to have your ducks in a row. You've just got to know what the facts are. And of course, none of this brings us any closer to knowing how you stop it from happening, but I guess understanding it has got to be the first step, hasn't it? Nick, thank you. Did you see that play Punch when it was on at the Playhouse?
No, sorry.
Mate, you should. I tell you what, you missed out on a treat there. It's the best thing to come out of Nottingham since Brian Clough, and I know he wasn't originally from Nottingham, but it is. I saw it at the Young Vic earlier this week, and it is the best play, but the best new play that I've seen in a desperately long time by the brilliant James Graham. And I didn't mention the actor who plays the lead role. He's called David Shields. You may have seen him on other stuff. I think he was in The Crown, but goodness me, watch him. Put me in mind of a young Tom Hardy or an actor of that kind of depth and nuance. Absolutely incredible performance. The kind of thing that you never forget. I've seen a couple of those in my life. I saw Kenneth Branagh play Henry V. I saw Mark Rylance play Romeo. Just somewhere inside you knew you were in the presence of greatness. There you go. You weren't expecting a bit of lit crit when you rang in to talk about Donald Trump, but you know how this programme works. Have I got time for one more, or do we turn to Natasha to start setting the scene for PMQs? What do you think, Natasha?
You've got time for another call.
Are you flicking furiously through your notebook?
It's on my phone, actually.
That's very analogue.
It's actually on my phone.
Oh, okay. John in Shrewsbury, I don't have long, but I do want to hear your voice, John. What would you like to say?
Just that I think people are underestimating Trump a little bit today, although Dean's call was amazing.
It was great, wasn't it? Very special, very special.
Yeah. But I think people are underestimating the scale of what he's trying to do with these tax cuts for himself and his friends. It's something like 4.3 trillion, and I did the maths on this, and dollars a year, and it's the equivalent of 2,000 years of NHS funding, which is incredible. So, 4 trillion divided by 100 billion comes out of 2,000. So
the NHS is a wonderful example of what these people find repellent, isn't it? The idea that you get medical treatment even if you can't afford to pay for it yourself. You get looked after if you get cancer, even though you're not rich. That's just disgusting. I don't want to live in a country like that.
I know. It's also a really useful way of measuring big numbers, because all the numbers rhyme, million, billion, trillion, but there's 1,000, scale in between each one. So imagine what they could do with 2,000 years worth of NHS money, but they're going to give it to their friends, and that's why they were all sitting behind him. And all the rest of it is a distraction from that great aim.
You just get it or you don't, right? You're sitting there, you're worth gazillions of pounds. Numbers, words that haven't been invented yet to describe how rich you are. And your motivating force is a desire to be richer. Yeah, well,
what was yours? Weapons-grade self-interest.
Yeah.
That's what you said, wasn't it? And that's what's on display.
You can't get your head around it, can you? I mean, I think we've all got a concept of enough. Except these men have no idea what enough means. No idea at all. John, I warned you I didn't have long. Thank you. It is coming up to 11:59. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As is becoming the habit on Wednesdays, I have a number of fascinating guests for you a little later in the programme, including Donie O'Sullivan, the senior correspondent at CNN, who has... in recent weeks alone, he's interviewed Steve Bannon. He's spoken to people in Greenland. They got their election results in, of course, overnight. And he's even stood in the midst of January the 6th criminals as they were released early from prison by President Trump, up to and including ones that actually attacked the forces of law and order. So whenever you catch yourself thinking you might be exaggerating what's going on in the United States, you remember some things that actually happened, some events and some facts, and you think, well, maybe we're not actually alarmed enough. But it is to British politics that we turn next, namely PMQs. Natasha Clark is here. What might we expect?
Well, I think from Kemi Badenoch this afternoon rather. Farmers, employment and migration are three of my topics that I think she could go on. Today, the Tories are getting very angry about what's called SFI. Do you know what that is?
Nope.
Sustainable Farming Initiative.
Okay.
It's a post-Brexit regime, rather, that was brought in to replace lots of the subsidies that came from the EU for farmers after Brexit. The government have just announced they're going to end them, but they've not announced what they're going to replace them with, which is obviously upsetting quite a lot more farmers, on top of the so-called farmers' tax.
They're constantly upset, aren't they?
They are constantly
I don't mean that in an ungenerous term. But these Tories are big free marketeers, though, aren't they? They should be opposed to this kind of subsidy.
You'd think so, yes, but no. We do need to grow some of our own food in this country for food security reasons too. I think is what they would say.
If you can't make a profit, have you never been to Tufton Street? If you can't make a profit out of it, then frankly you're going to have to wither on the vine and die. Indeed, Jacob Rees-Mogg made this point while he was campaigning for Brexit. That these businesses may go under, farming may die. They were told.
So that's one potential topic for her. The Employment Rights Bill, that's back in the House of Commons today. We know that lots of businesses are quite upset and quite worried about what's going to come for that. We're going to get, hopefully, a bit more detail about what that will look like later today. Migration is also something that I know we've talked about how poorly we think Kemi Badenoch usually talks about the issue of migration. They've really been pushing on it this week with a whole raft of new amendments to various bits of legislation, including things like they want to deport all foreign criminals, saying that they can't do such at the moment, and change the ECHR to exempt them from immigration cases. Right. So those two could crop up. But equally, it's 2 weeks till the spring statement. If I were Kemi Badenoch, I'd just go on the spring statement. I go on the economy. I go on all these taxes that are expected to go up in April, and whether that is going to put another cost of living squeeze on Brits. For Keir Starmer, I'm sure we'll hear more about Ukraine, the planning bill that's going through Parliament, more houses, more infrastructure. I wonder if there'll be another joke about Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe and the Reform Party too. I'm sure he won't be able to help himself from making a little sideswipe there.
Well, no, we'll see. They'll be in the chamber, will they? Both of them. Where would Rupert Lowe sit now? Do we know? Well, does he?
Well, he can sit basically wherever he likes.
Jeremy Corbyn.
He obviously can't sit on probably he can't sit on the government bench.
The independents, as it were.
Probably at the end. I imagine he'll sit at the end of the reform row if he does in fact turn up, which I imagine he probably would do. Him and Nigel Farage have been more spatting on social media this morning.
Do we care?
This time about rape gangs.
Oh Lord.
Rupert Lowe has accused Nigel Farage Farage of trying to silence him over rape gangs. Nigel Farage has hit back, saying he's out to cause damage and should be ignored by our supporters. I'm sure that will at some point get a bit of a joke from one of the MPs.
The Low guy also said that you're not allowed to have a beer or go to the football anymore without being called a racist or something like that. I can't remember exactly what his words are.
Maybe those.
I'm beginning to think he might be a bit of a plonker.
Look, I mean, I told you I sat through 50 minutes of watching this interview for you. Maybe my eyes glazed over when he said that.
I'm not sure I gave you the credit that you deserve for that. I mean, I'll try and find the thing that I'm referring to, actually, because, again, we're living in a universe where we've all got whiplash through doing double takes. You keep thinking that can't be real. They never put that on White House stationery. He never actually held that thing in his hand that looked like a crib sheet from a car forecourt, a car sales forecourt. Insanity is not a strategy. No one said that, but they all did. So normally I try and focus on what the worst examples of right-wing extremism are wanging on about in this country, and Honest Bob Jenrick has become a very useful weather vane for that. These sentencing guidelines, which almost all of the qualified legal professionals who I've heard explain, are designed to make things fairer. So we currently have a two-tier justice in the sense that if you belong to a certain demographic, you are demonstrably more likely to be locked up for longer.
That's right.
So they want to bring in sentence guidelines to make it one tier, to actually make it fairer. A lot of people are either too stupid or pretending not to understand that. Won't Bader not possibly fall into the category of, well, one or both of being too stupid or pretending not to understand what these guidelines are designed to do?
Well, potentially the Tories will go on that, if that's the question you're trying to ask me. No, I think this is a ripe topic to go on. Should we be creating a system which is inherently taking people's characteristics and using them as part of sentencing guidelines? And again, you make that very important point that lots of legal professionals are backing this, but it's caused a huge row in politics.
Later today, the Prime Minister is meeting the family of Sir David Amess. Sir David gave this House and our country 40 years of service. I hope the Prime Minister will agree that getting the response to his murder right is vital, not just to his family, but to our democracy. Mr. Speaker, every week, I speak to businesses who are letting go of staff or closing. Has the Prime Minister been given an estimate of how many people will lose their jobs because of his budget?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just on the question of Sir David, he was a deeply loved and respected colleague, and behind me is the plaque, as is the plaque to Joe Cox in front of me. And I know this was deeply felt by the House, but particularly, as I acknowledged at the time, by the party opposite, who lost a colleague and a friend in the most awful of circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the Amess family later on today, and will make sure that they get answers to the questions that they ask. Mr. Speaker, in relation to businesses, I'm really pleased to say we've got thousands of new jobs into the economy. We've got more investment in the last 20 years, an absolute record. Wages are up higher than prices. 3 interest rate cuts, the best boost for the cost of living for a very long time.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to get out more. Inflation is up, and estimates of job losses are between 130,000 and 300,000. Okay. His tax rises are hurting every sector of the economy. Things are getting worse for nurseries. Nurseries are writing to stressed parents right now, telling them that fees will go up because of his jobs tax. Can he explain how more expensive childcare is good for the economy or for working families struggling to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting in childcare. Look at the breakfast clubs, 2 in her constituency. But she's rather forgetting the $22 billion black hole that they left, that we had to deal with. That's why we had to take the necessary but right measures we did in the budget. And what's her response? Not that she'd reverse them. Oh no, she doesn't say that. She attacks what we've done, but she doesn't say she would reverse it, because she wants all the benefits of our budget in return to investment, but she doesn't want to pay for it. That's how we got into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is out of touch because he should know that nurseries are charging over £2,000 for full-time care. That's £24,000 a year after tax, and he's talking about 60p breakfast clubs. He has no idea what people out there are experiencing, and it is not just the families. Even councils must pay his jobs tax. To cope with it, the average council tax bill is increasing by over £100 in April, after he promised to freeze it. Hard-working families' money is going to the Chancellor instead of social care and fixing potholes. Why should these families pay more for less?
Well, she really shouldn't denigrate what she calls, I think, 60p breakfast clubs. She should be welcoming them. And she asked about council tax, Mr. Speaker. The Tories put up council tax every year for 12 years. Their manifesto, Tory LGA manifesto, government should remove the caps on council tax. And then Hampshire Council, Tory, wanted a 15% increase. We said no. Slough Council, again, Mr. Speaker, Tory, wanted 3%. We said no. Windsor and Maidenhead, Tory, now Lib Dem, wanted 25%. We said no. We're the ones that are doing the right things to get this country on the right track.
Mr. Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze, and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Mr. Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not looking at what is happening out there. Every day I speak to businesses who are telling us that they think that they are going bust. And as if businesses and families didn't have enough to worry about, supermarkets say food prices will increase by over 4% because of the jobs tax. And that's before we get to the immoral family farms tax on the very farmers who work so hard to produce our food. What does the Prime Minister have against farmers anyway? Does he not see that his budget is killing farming in this country and he is making life so much harder for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, the budget provided £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years. That is a record amount. We've set out the roadmap for farming, which has been welcomed by farmers. And many thousands of farms have benefited from the farming schemes. But she talks about prices. Wages are going up higher than prices. That's the first in a long time that's happened. So for families across the country, they're better off under Labour.
He's got no answers today. What the farmers are complaining about is the sustainable farming incentive, which he has just scrapped or withdrawn. They are making mistakes with this budget. And that's why in 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events, but the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners. Then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr. Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole. a mini budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 1 in 8 young people across the country not in education, employment or training, people in rugby are worried about a wasted generation. Too many people with disabilities and health conditions are not getting the help that they need to get into work. So will the Prime Minister set out how this government will give everyone who is able to work the support they need, provide compassion to those who can't work, and fix the broken welfare system left behind by, you guessed it, the Conservatives?
I thank him for raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years, so I do understand the concerns that have been raised by him. But we inherited a system which is broken, it is indefensible economically and morally, and we must and we will reform it. We will have clear principles, Mr. Speaker. We will protect those who need protecting. We will also support those who can work back to work. But Labour is the party of work. We are also the party of equality and fairness.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by giving a shout out for Young Carers Action Day today, but I promise the House I will not sing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to get more people into work, and he repeated that now, so people have more dignity, we can get the economy going, and we can cut the benefits bill after the disgraceful legacy left by the Conservatives.
You were there for 5 years.
But does the Prime Minister recognise that for many disabled people, the best way to help them into work is to support them properly with more special equipment, with training, with better healthcare and so on? And will he also today calm anxieties that he himself has raised for many of us, that the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut?
Mr. Speaker, we will, of course, as I've just said, the principles, we will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation. That is their inheritance. They've got plenty to say now. They did nothing for 14 years and left this in terrible inheritance.
And Davey.
Mr. Speaker, turning to international issues, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on helping to secure the restoration of US military and intelligence support for Ukraine? But can I press him on progress to persuade President Trump against damaging metal tariffs already hitting British industry? The Prime Minister knows that we on these benches believe he must be more robust with President Trump, like the Europeans and like the Canadians. So will the Prime Minister fly out to Canada as soon as possible to show their new Prime Minister and the Canadian people that Britain stands with its Commonwealth allies against Trump's threats and against Trump's tariffs?
Well, Canada is an ally and a very important ally too, and I've spoken to our allies on many occasions about the situation in Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Claire Hanna.
Hi, Father Conadeve, August Shock na Gilga, Foster.
16 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will start picking over the bones of what has just unfolded after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 12. I am naught but a vessel through which you, of course, can reach a wider audience than you get from sticking your head out the car window and barking at the moon. But I do, and I'm getting a lot of messages picking up on the fact that there are no bin man strikes, bin person strikes, rubbish refuse collector strikes in Liverpool, but I don't think she said that there was. Chris and Mike and John and others. Hi James, Liverpool resident here. I can solidly confirm that rubbish is not piling up in this city, and I'm deeply shocked at this misrepresentation of our beautiful city. Say what you like about Scousers, they've got a very high opinion of Liverpool. I'm fairly confident, and rightly so. It's a magnificent place. That's where my wife got her degree. I don't think she actually said that. I think she alluded specifically to the bin problem in Birmingham, where the councils are on strike, and then said, if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool, and they're not telling us why we'd want to look at Liverpool, though it's probably got something to do with charges being brought against politicians, former politicians there, or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high. So I mean, it's clumsily written, which is amazing, given that she is someone who repeatedly tells us that she never has to clarify anything she says, because she never says anything that needs clarifying. But I don't think it was actually maligning Liverpool. And what she did do, though, Natasha Clark, and I think we can all agree upon this, it was as if the ghost of Oscar Wilde had inhabited the chamber for a moment. It was as if Peter Ustinov had never left us. She said, and trash is piling up, like what you is saying over there. Sorry, did I say Oscar Wilde? I think I meant Vicky Pollard.
Oh, harsh. That was the only thing that got a laugh from her own backbenchers, though. They liked that. They were screaming out, crying out more, which was the only time I remember. They haven't really been giving her a lot of support, it's fair to say, at any Prime Minister's questions. That was the only time.
I salute your generosity of spirit. I really do. I think the laughter was coming from the Labour benches.
Maybe it was.
The lameness of the joke.
Potentially. But look, going on the economy is what I would have done, and I think actually in the 3 weeks to the budget is not a bad way of doing it. Saying that Keir Starmer needs to get out a little bit more and talk to businesses about all the things that are actually going on out there. There are a lot of real concerns about what's going on in business. Oh, you've got something funny to read from the text.
Don't do that. We're on the radio. Don't start reacting to my face. No one can hear me laughing.
I heard you on the microphone.
You saw me laughing. So
no,
anyway, Graham just texted to say, did I hear her use the word trash? I nearly cringed my eyes out. That's not a phrase I've come across before, but
obviously
I like
I'm not in the chamber, so I can't hear which side is laughing and which side is booing and whatnot. Yes. But look, like I say, I think the economy, a good topic for her to go on. Not quite sure she really delivered any knockout blows, but I think she did push him a little bit more than she has done previously. You were saying in the break that you think that the idea that the Conservatives left to that £22 billion black hole and the legacy that was left is still a strong enough argument to go on. What sort of makes you think that?
Let me read you what John says. Badenoch was sort of more coherent today. I almost felt sorry for her. Starmer, for a while, is able to keep bashing her over the head with the Conservatives' record. That, in a nutshell, is why.
Yeah.
But he goes on to say, however, the elephant in the room should be the Brexit she supported, which blew up farmers and almost everyone she now professes to clutch her pearls for. I find that fascinating, because he's absolutely right in that as we touched on before we crossed to the chamber, that some Tories actually said that this will ruin farming.
Yeah.
And they are not yet Tories who have abandoned the claim that Brexit would be good for Britain. And Starmer can't go there for reasons that are becoming increasingly opaque as you look at the polling. But if you cared about British farmers, you would not, and you were bright enough to understand what was going on.
EU subsidies to farmers were incredibly generous.
You would not have voted for Brexit. And further, if you were truly paying attention, you'd have heard people like Patrick Minford, who was the only economist you could book at one point, who would tell you that Brexit was going to be good for the United Kingdom, the only properly qualified academic economist. He literally said that agriculture and manufacturing would be completely destroyed by Brexit. But Starmer can't go there. It won't go there.
Yeah.
Can't or won't?
Probably a bit of both.
Oh, come off it. You're not a politician.
Probably won't.
Yeah,
probably doesn't want to wade into that. And look, I do think that the whole farmers' inheritance tax row was a misstep for the government. They've reframed it as a row they want to fight over inheritance tax. I think they generally think that's working. They are staring them down. Despite repeated tractors going up and down Whitehall every other week, there's no signs of any imminent softening of this. But yes, you're completely right in the fact that we took back control of our farming regime, and what have they replaced it with? Something that farmers like even less. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly why Keir Starmer feels that it's not something that he can really row in behind on. But
because it speaks to authenticity. It speaks to Badenoch's claims to care for these people. In fact, as John put it, almost everyone she now professes to clutch her pearls for was hit really hard, much harder by Brexit than by...
pensioners, businesses, councils. You can have that argument with all three of them. You know, she talks about winter fuel, she talks about the hiking, jobs tax, she talks about council tax going up. But this is all stuff that the Conservatives have left a pretty tricky legacy for her to navigate. And maybe that's just the whole reason why she's having such a torrid time at Prime Minister's questions. Maybe there is no Conservative leader that's able to go up against Keir Starmer at this point in an electoral cycle with the economy in the sort of state that it is and actually land any blows. Who would be doing a better job? And, is there anybody that can?
Point. Honest Bob Jenrick would stand up and try to be even viler about foreigners and refugees than the people in the Reform Party managed to be, and then promise to start painting over more murals.
He probably would do.
But I don't think he'd get many cheers from his own benches for that kind of nativist, atavistic poison.
I think there is a bit of a backlash within the Conservatives at this sort of reform agenda, and I'm hearing more Conservatives say to me recently, we don't want to go to the reform side, and we think we should be fighting harder to get back those Liberal Democrat voters.
They've got the wrong leader, and they've got the wrong leader in waiting.
Well, exactly. So, it doesn't feel like that's going to be anything they are doing anytime soon. But we should talk about Ed Davey, because those two questions that he put forward were Starmer's answers were really revealing. Talking about the US-Ukraine support, tariffs, and disabilities benefits, and you heard that. You had that one of those backbenchers as well standing up to ask him about disabilities benefits. This is going to be a huge fight for the Prime Minister to have. And, you heard him talk about, I know disabilities. My mother, his family have been affected by this. And so he says he does understand concerns about cuts to disabilities benefits, which he told the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, earlier this week, he is going to have to press ahead and do because, and he blames the size of the welfare bill that was left by the last Conservative government. He says it's broken, indefensible, and we must and will reform it. So this is going to be a huge fight for him. And left-wing MPs, left, right and centre are going, I cannot vote for something which actually will cut disability benefits for people who cannot work. Yes. And the true test of this will be, the devil will be in the detail, whether that actually does come or not, whether he sticks to that vow and what exactly these reforms look like. And we don't know yet.
We are back, oddly, given that I was talking about Brexit and Keir Starmer, we're back to the difference between can't and won't. And as you said yourself, it might be a bit of both, of the difficulty of properly distinguishing between can't and won't. And it's fair to say there are no policy proposals in place yet, or even kites flying above Westminster at this point that provide much optimism that this lot will be able to do what the previous lot and the lot before that and the lot before that and the lot before that couldn't do, and distinguish meaningfully between can't and won't. And I didn't hear the words long COVID, which I think are going to have to start popping up in these conversations sooner rather than later, just for simple statistical reasons. I'm going to put you in an uncomfortable situation now. Vaguely.
You always like to try.
You've no idea. If we were, there's one obvious answer to this question, but if we were to look for the maypole around which the more moderate members you just talked about may dance, the Conservatives who want to reset a course away from the nativist demagoguery of Farage and Rupert Lowe and Richard Tye. So just run through it again, will you? Murdoch is the one that got jailed for beating up a woman.
We're not doing this again.
I think it's important because people don't know what's going on.
We're talking about the Conservative Party.
We are, but why they don't want to be more like Reform, because at the moment Reform has 4 MPs, one of whom got locked up for beating up his ex-girlfriend, one of whom has a girlfriend who's an economic migrant, one of whom is a massive Vladimir Putin fan, and who's the other? Oh, and one of whom is 30p Lee. Crikey, we'd be here all day if we start listing all the reasons why you wouldn't want to be like him. But if the Tories were to find a maypole around which the people wanting to tack in the other direction might dance, who might they look at?
I'm not going to answer who's been telling me and who's been giving me those sort of suggestions, but it doesn't come from the front bench of the Conservative Party, that's fair to say. I think Kemi Badenoch has very much shaped that in her own image.
But who do you think?
Who do I think?
Who do you think might be a rallying point for these people?
I think it's some of those MPs who perhaps we were expecting to lose their seats and haven't. And MPs from sort of the Conservatives over the years, and some of them are slightly newer MPs, some of them are slightly older hats, that have seen the Conservative Party change and realise...
There's 2 questions you've signally failed to answer.
I'd make a great politician.
A little bit of both. So, Cleverly?
Definitely James Cleverly. Again, someone not in there. Tom Tugendhat, again, deliberately not in the shadow cabinet. Even people, and even you might you'll probably hate me for saying this, even people like Jeremy Hunt are people that...
I wouldn't know. I mean, compared to the rest of them, Jeremy Hunt is a statesman.
And realises the importance of not tacking to the right, and realises the Liberal Democrat threat that he faces in places. He just about held on to his seat, and others didn't. So, he should. People should take a leaf from his book rather than go to the reform.
And another question that you will almost certainly not want to answer.
Go on, try me.
When do you think they'll start coming for Badenoch?
Well, I was speaking to an MP the other day who doesn't think there's a lot of time left for Kemi Badenoch to start making inroads. There's a lot of talk, including about who's going to try and muscle up to replace her. People like Robert Jenrick are being openly talked about, and whether they are openly planning a leadership bid at this point. But look, she has until a year in the job before they can even challenge her, because the party changed the membership rules. Whether they would do so again, I don't feel like there's any appetite to change the rules now to do anything yet. But I reckon once that year point comes in, I hear that next week she's going to be giving a big speech talking about some of the policies that she wants to be bringing forward.
Excellent.
So that'll be really
Clear your
delightful.
diaries. What day? Do we know?
We'll be with you. Potentially Tuesday or Wednesday.
Thank goodness for that. At least they don't mess with mystery, because I'd be tempted.
I'll bring it to you, all of the details, once I know it.
Thank you.
But I think she has got about a year until people start to ask the genuine questions. Where have you moved the party? What policies are you doing? How much rebuilding have you done? Are you bringing in money for the party? And is that fight back really happening? Because there are a lot of people in the party that believe that under Kemi Badenoch, a lot of people aren't really pulling their weight.
It was supposedly Napoleon who said that I need lucky generals, and she doesn't look like a lucky general at the moment.
I just don't think any general can be lucky in the Conservative Party right now.
And just as you say that, I glance to my right, and nestling in the corner of the screen as another MP makes a speech, we're reminded of the existence of Marc Francois. Cometh the hour.
Cometh the man.
Cometh the news. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's funny how many of the conversations we have at the moment, unexpectedly sometimes, end up circling similar territory. The tension between short-term and long-term investment. You might save money today by not spending money on something, but fixing the problems that will be spawned by the failure to fix it will cost you considerably more 10 years hence. I told you that they use potholes as a wonderful analogy in that play I keep raving about that's on at the Young Vic at the moment, Punch by James Graham, and because it's a wonderful example of something that if you fix it early, it costs next to nothing, whereas if you wait a very, very long time, it costs a fortune. And we return to the question of cost, value, deficit. Emma Holten is a journalist and author, a feminist activist. And in 2020, Emma, you wrote an article stating that women were a net deficit to society, that they took more than they gave. You didn't write it, you read it.
Exactly.
That they were draining the public purse by giving birth and taking parental leave. And I mean, it's fair to say that this piqued your interest.
I'd say, yeah. I've spent every waking moment thinking about it, and some sleeping moments as well.
Yes.
I think what that article kind of sparked in me was this idea of how do we measure what is value creating? And it was especially prescient to me because just a year earlier, I had been in hospital for a whole week with an autoimmune illness. And the nurses I met there, I think pretty obviously, I can say, saved my life. And it became clear to me that the way that we speak about value and calculate value in politics struggles immensely with the work and the labor of taking care of people, both for a salary at hospitals, schools, etc., but also in the home. And that has kind of skewed politics so that every penny spent on care is perceived as a cost or even a deficit to society and not an investment or something that creates something.
I don't want to sound like the child in the sixth sense, but we were talking before you came in about Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, one of the big sponsors of Donald Trump. He's on the record as blaming women for women and welfare claimants for being one of the obstacles to economic growth. Even, I think, he went as far as to suggest that they're a sort of enemy of progress, economic growth.
It's extremely common. You hear it, culturally, you hear it all the time, and kind of, layman's people saying it, as a joke, but kind of meaning it a little. And I think that what I describe in Deficit is that all through economic history, there has been this desire to measure value perfectly. And the way that they went about doing that and ended up doing it was through prices. So a banker making, £10,000 a month is, in economic terms, more of a wealth creator or a value creator than a nurse making £3,000. And I think that is not aligned with how value actually works in the real economy, and it gives us a skewed image of what actually matters in an economy.
I've got an image of St. Peter at the pearly gate,
right,
with the billionaire financial trader and the nurse, and he opens his big book and looks at what they achieved.
I think,
in their
isn't
lives.
it in the Bible? It says that a rich man has just good a chance of getting into heaven as a camel has it entering a needle's thread.
Yes, indeed it is. Well, we're swapping quotes. I'm reminded. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, "A cynic is someone who knows the value of the price of everything and the value of nothing."
Yeah, that quote certainly made it in there.
I know. And how feminist economics can change our world is the subtitle of your new book, Deficit, already an international bestseller and a winner of one of the biggest literary prizes in your native Denmark. Actually, before we move on, there is, in the very early pages of the book, you name check a British politician. There's a Reform Party candidate who speaks very directly to what you're describing.
Yeah, a Reform Party candidate kind of shows how these types of ideas of value creep into the political conversation, as he writes on this message board, that women are kind of like eating away at growth and at wealth. What he calls it the sponging gender, I think is his term. And I think that of course you can find this, reprehensible on a personal level or just an ethical level. But I think what really happens in the larger political conversation is that it makes it so that investments in care, or money spent on care, is seen as expenses, as not something that creates something, but something that creates a deficit. Whereas, money that is spent on factories is seen as something that is creating real wealth. And it fails on two counts. First of all, it fails on what care does in the economy, yes, but it also fails on what does care do to make people happy and healthy.
I mean, it goes right back to domestic division, doesn't it? I mean, in a way, the idea that the man goes out to bring home the bacon and the woman stays home and cooks it. That's not a deliberately Danish reference, but it's baked into our social views in many ways.
Yeah, I think especially since the Enlightenment, basically, where I start my book, there's the home has been a little bit of an Achilles heel for economics. They don't really know how to deal with it. I think it was Thomas Hobbes who wrote, that people sprung up as so many mushrooms. Like, yes, they don't want to talk about the labor that it takes to make a human being. And this has kind of created a language in policy and economics that is incredibly powerful, where all the things that care creates, and I think this is interesting now because we're having all these cultural discussions about the value of care, clapping for carers, all that, but nothing material is happening. And that's what I explain in my book, is that as long as we look at economics the way we're doing now, care will always be taken for granted, undervalued, and the people who do it will be overworked and underpaid.
It sits, for me at least, alongside the work of Laura Bates or Caroline Criado Perez as something that makes a man rethink the lenses through which he's looked at the world. Not necessarily rethink the world that he lives in, but rethink the lenses through which he has looked at that world.
Yeah, I think the thing with care is that it's both a burden, but it's also a privilege. I think many men are also being denied the right, yes, to care, to be at home. I think oftentimes we say women care and men, prioritize their self-interest in their careers. But for many men, their career and their labor is the care that they give to their family. And I think that we're misunderstanding men if we're saying that men are the lucky ones who are working all the time and women are the unlucky ones doing care. We have to have a double vision and say that care is also a fantastic thing to participate in.
What's the currency of care? How would we measure it? How would we...
I think time.
Yeah.
I think time is good, but I think what is difficult with currency is that currency is always scarce. I have £1, I give one to you, I have one less. But the thing with care, and that also makes it so slippery and difficult and annoying for economists, is that it is expansive. Yes. So when I'm caring for you, I'm also caring for myself. I'm also making myself larger as I'm making you larger. And I think the same goes for caring for children. It is annoying, they're annoying, it takes time, but it's also... incredibly gratifying. I think most people on their deathbed will say the great joy of their life. And I think because care is not scarce in the same way, it is not well suited for the language of economics. And that's why it tends to get constantly fall by the wayside and get devalued and often set to zero.
And that's why the book fills a space that is largely empty prior to you. I mean, on author to author, did that surprise you while you were writing it? Did you think, crikey, I can't believe that I've not stumbled necessarily into this huge and almost unoccupied territory?
I think feminist economics has a rich history, but it has yet to kind of, in my opinion, take the big stage, center stage that it needs to have, because it speaks to so many of the issues that we're having: loneliness, depression, splits between people, radicalization on both the left and the right, lack of social cohesion, a lack of health, education, all these types of things of maintaining the human being. It's because our definition of wealth, our definition of what a rich country is, simply has no space for care. So what looks in the Excel sheet as being richer is actually making the space for care smaller and smaller and smaller.
It's almost an antithesis of Trumpism. What you're describing.
I think it feels slightly prophetic, because one of the things that I critique in the book is the idea of efficiency, and how often efficiency means less humanity. You mean less, the friction, they call it, of our emotions, of our bodies, that we can become ill or fall in love, or all these things that happen to us. And I think the idea that the public sector, that care is inefficient and that factories are efficient, is exactly what Doge and Elon Musk are speaking to, and Thiel as well, is that the real economy is the factory and products. And what is created in the public sector or in the home or in care services is not real. It is a burden. It pulls us down.
So how do we turn this oil tanker around? Final question.
Yeah, it's a heavy one, but I think what we do is we need to look away from numbers and look at the real economy. £100 is £100. For £100, you can buy an expensive bottle of wine, but you can also buy an hour's help for a kid with autism. So £100 is not just one value. What we need to ask ourselves is, will the £100 create? And I think £100 spent on care create a lot, much more than we're giving it credit for now.
Deficit, How Feminist Economics Can Change Our World, it's out now. Available in all good bookshops, and almost certainly in quite mediocre bookshops as well. At least I hope so. Emma Holten, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
What are you going to do next?
I'm actually, going back to Copenhagen for a prize ceremony for the prize that you were talking about now.
Life is good.
Sometimes I'm lucky.
It's published by W.H. Allen, but as I say, it will be on that book in the front of your local bookshop where they put all the clever writers.
Thanks so much.
So be sure to grab it. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I hope Emma can still hear. What an inspiring guest, writes Hannah, speaking for many people getting in touch about the author of Deficit, How Feminist Economics Can Change Our World, by Emma Holten, Holten, comes highly recommended from me, as indeed does my next guest. Donie O'Sullivan is a senior correspondent at CNN. He has had the dubious pleasure in recent weeks of interviewing Steve Bannon, spoken to the people of Greenland, who of course have now elected a centre-right party that was at the forefront of telling Donald Trump where to stick his plans to either annex or, steal the sovereign territory. The sovereign territory. And he has immersed himself in the January the 6th criminals who were released early from prison by President Trump, up to and including, of course, some who had attacked police officers, forces of law and order. You also have a regular programme on the station called Misinfo Nation that seeks to investigate the American political wilderness and those caught up in a maelstrom of misinformation. Where did that title come from, Donie?
I don't know what you're setting me up for here, James.
Put your headphones on.
I came up with that title, and I was very proud of it. But I believe you.
Do you have it voiced by a very famous person?
Not yet.
No,
not yet.
I mean, someone like this.
Missed information.
Oh, Emily Maitlis doing missed information. Okay. Not quite. I think yours is better, actually. But it looks better in print, doesn't it? Misinfo Nation.
You had me sweating there a minute.
Come off it. Great minds, mate. Great minds. What's the most shocking or surprising thing you've stumbled across so far?
Oh my God! I mean, I think that the past few weeks, there was so much talk and build up to Trump's inauguration as to who he was going to pardon when it came to the J6ers, the January 6 people who stormed the Capitol. And, even within the Republican Party, there was so much talk that, he's not going to go as far as pardoning guys who are beating up cops, given the Republican Party there is so pro-police. And then he just came out and pardoned or commuted the sentences of everybody from Proud Boys and Oath Keeper militiamen all the way down. So I think that really just sort of set the tone.
Vicious, violent criminals who had targeted officers of the law.
And set the tone, I think, for this presidency. And what we saw immediately just a few weeks ago was CPAC, the sort of main conservative conference that happens in Washington, D.C. every year. Some of these J6 guys came back and targeted, were following around, harassing, shouting at January police officers who had spoken out, police officers who had served on January 6 at the Capitol, who had spoken out. These guys were going around chasing them around the police. So they have that sort of impunity now.
In a way, and another guest on the programme has suggested that he has sort of created his own brown shirts, potentially, in the event of future flashpoints. He's given a message to people who are drawn to that kind of, if ideology is the right word, but certainly that kind of behaviour, that they will be able to conduct themselves without any fear of prosecution. But in a way, that's a perfect example of something that would be the only story in town in times of normality. And yet many people listening to this will have either forgotten about it or overlooked it.
It's incredible. And that is so much stuff is happening every single day. And you mentioned Steve Bannon there. I mean, he articulated this as a strategy pretty clearly in Trump's first administration, which was to say, just blitz people with actions, with information, with misinformation. Do so many things a day. And, he sort of spoke belittlingly of journalists and of newspapers to say, journalists are stupid. They can only focus on one thing at a time. So they'll focus on one thing and you do everything else. But I think all of us, the public, the electorate can't take in so much of what is happening every single day. So I think it's a pretty deliberate strategy. I mean, I briefly forgot until yesterday that Dan Bongino, who is this sort of shock jock, real far right podcaster in the US, is the deputy director of the FBI. Again, that would be just a massive news story, but was barely a blimp because so much is happening.
We'll be the equivalent of a couple of British people who were working for Breitbart not long ago. It'd be the equivalent of one of them popping up as kind of the most senior civil servant in the Home Office.
Yeah, so that is where we are.
And Bannon, of course, founded Breitbart. He also went to prison for ripping off the Trump base. I get confused, but he got pardoned for one crime. He got pardoned because he refused to go to the January the 6th hearings.
Yeah, he got
banged up for ripping people off. Yeah. Claiming he was going to build a wall independently of the government and keeping all the money.
Correct, and I believe they were state charges, so he couldn't get that pardon from Trump. But what's actually interesting, what's happened, and I've seen even with Bannon, and you mentioned, I spoke to Bannon recently, is that during the first Trump administration, Bannon was viewed really by the mainstream press as the extreme.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And now he's been giving interviews to CNN, New York Times, everybody else, more so because he's almost seen as a moderate now compared to what is in the administration. So you talk about just shifting the goalposts, Overton window, whatever you want to call it.
Hyper-normalization for Adam Curtis fans.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Lot of material for Adam Curtis over these past 6 weeks.
Trying to get hold of him, actually. He's quite a hard man to find. And you mentioned Bannon. You described the fact that he is now being left behind by some of the other movements. What do you have a view on what the plan is? I mean, it's the question we keep coming back to. And the CNBC correspondent overnight saying insanity is no way to govern. I forget what his precise words were, but one of them was definitely insanity. And disruption isn't a glitch; it's a feature. These are great glib lines. But is there an end game? Are you aware of an end game that they all have in sight? Insanity is not, I'm going to get this absolutely right, insanity is not a strategy, but it looks like one, doesn't it, from here?
Well, I think that is the strategy, right?
But why?
Well, I think, look, he clearly wants to dismantle the federal. Look, here's what Trump has told and has convinced his base in the US and why he got elected. One is the federal government is too big. And look, parts of everything Trump says are accurate.
Always, yeah.
But it's the issue then that he goes too far, and it's how he executes it. And then specifically, I mean, when it comes to Ukraine and the rest of the world, he has convinced Americans that they are being ripped off, that the Brits, that Europe, that everybody is sort of taking America for a ride, and, we're not getting our money's worth anywhere. So, even the reaction within the US to how Zelensky was treated in the Oval Office that day, it wasn't as shocking to I think, as many Americans as folks back here might think, because they're saying, good, yeah, we're standing up to this guy. There's this total disconnect from, and Trump keeps saying there's an ocean. Yeah. There's an ocean between the US and Europe, so therefore everything's okay. But I'm back to your original question. I think it's really difficult right now to see. I think it's going to be 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months down the line, internally, domestically in the US, where we really maybe will start to see the effects of all of these cuts.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing it in the stock market now and things like that. But in terms of people actually maybe pushing back on this, I think it's going to take a few months. Many people would say at that point it's too late. He's broken up things already. So to say, cliche, but uncharted territory is certainly where we are.
Is there any political resistance to speak of?
That is the issue, right? Yeah. It's just shocking. It is shocking how bad the Democrats are at pulling together any form of opposition. And I think a couple of things happened there. I mean, I was in the, you might remember when Trump got elected in 2016, there was a huge women's march in DC. I think 1 million people showed up around the country protesting, basically, his election. And at that point, he hadn't won the popular vote. This time they had a similar, much smaller march. And, I think you can question, why would you have a protest immediately after a democratically run election? But the resistance is tired. Everybody is tired. And I think also what we're really seeing now, the effects is that some of the most prominent Democrats in the USA are very old. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. And I think what Biden did by insisting on running and then not having a primary process, is that some of the stars, the next generation of Democratic leaders that we might have got to see during that process didn't get to emerge. So I think they're in this terrible space. Look, if you listen to James Carville, the former Bill Clinton advisor, he would say, just wait it out. Just let Trump blow and then, excuse me. Are we Ofcom? I'm sorry.
That's fine. I'll handle it. It's all good. It's all good.
There's a fire in the control room right now.
I don't think that'll make the adverts, but we're not going to drop it. So let the dust settle before you decide what to do next.
Yeah,
if it settles. So
if it settles, yeah. And look, I think there's this sort of. I think the strategy is wait a few months, wait 12 months' time, and the midterms will be coming around the corner.
But of course, people could go. I mean, if not bankrupt, then they're going to struggle.
A lot can happen.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see what he did.
To ordinary people.
Yeah, and you can see what he did in the past, 6-7 weeks already. But there is this sort of cognitive dissonance, I guess, a sort of disconnect between. We did a story recently, CNN, on teachers in a rural, really poor part of Kentucky, in Appalachia, all of whom are depending. The school is totally dependent on federal government money from the Department of Education, but they all still voted for Trump.
Yeah,
and Trump's about to blow
eating face party stuff, isn't it?
And Trump's about to blow that up. And I guess people, one, think it's not going to come for them.
Yeah.
And two, they have this confidence that, well, even if this happens, somehow we're going to be okay. And
he didn't mean us. He didn't mean us. This must be a glitch. This must be a system error. I've got one more question to ask you, but I'm out of time, so I'll ask you off air, and I'll report back to my listeners tomorrow on what that question is.
I promise not to swear.
Potty mouth. Donie, thank you. Donie O'Sullivan, senior correspondent at CNN, whose work comes highly recommended in the brilliantly named Misinfo Nation, which currently lacks a tagline voiced by one of the greatest journalists in the country, but I'm sure we'll get one soon. Looks into a lot of the stuff we try to unravel as well, but with more time and space, investigating the American political wilderness. A bit more polished, perhaps, than we managed. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60-minute packages every single day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick will be with you, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.